So I did check to make sure this was going to be far enough, so I'll just work it over to you.
Hi. Can I have that one? I just needed to see the screen.
Oh, no, that's fine. You look at your insurance.
Yeah.
Can we turn it up so I can see his hand?
Yeah.
Do we have to like take these when we're not on? Yeah, it's better, yeah. Do dance or what?
Yeah. Just when you get up, you go.
Okay, yeah.
Because I'll put in place out.
That's what I was wondering.
Next one's are
Oh, yeah. Nice. Earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Mayor Pro Tem Barnes is on his way. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's workshop. This is a City Council workshop for July 28th, 2026. And we will get right into it because I know we have a few agenda items, including the first, which is the transportation update. So I'll hand it over to staff and to our Public Works Director.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Jeff Arthur, I'm the Public Works Director. With me tonight is Leslie Huey. She's our Engineering and Capital Projects Manager. So she oversees our engineering staff across water, wastewater, stormwater, and transportation. Michelle Melanakis is our Principal Transportation Engineer. Some of you may recall that we actually added our first dedicated transportation position in 2019. And so she's, I think, actually the only city employee who only does transportation. Everybody else does a little of everything. And also with me tonight is Casey Carlson. He's a senior civil engineer. Casey manages most of our transportation capital projects, as well as managing projects across the 3 utilities. And and as well as managing some capital projects for other city departments. Next slide. So tonight's agenda is an update on the city's progress on implementing the multimodal transportation plan. It was adopted in late 2023 and is broken into 5-year phases. We're about 2 years into the first phase, or the near-term phase. So tonight we're just going to provide a brief overview, kind of a refresher on the existing system and some of the key guiding documents. There's links to all of those in your packet, so you can get into those in detail. We'll do a quick break for questions, and then we'll jump into some implementation highlights. There is a lot that has been done in the last couple of years, so we will just be hitting that high level, but we'll save plenty of time for questions at the end. So jumping into an overview of our transportation system, we have a significant number of existing transportation assets and infrastructure. Most of our resources are dedicated to maintaining and rehabilitating those assets to avoid safety issues, but also to avoid them deteriorating to the point that we have to fully replace them, because that's significantly more costly than doing preventative maintenance and fixing things as we go. Another biggie, though, is our regional context. So we, while we spend most of our dollars maintaining our assets, a lot of our staff time ends up being dedicated to protecting the community's regional interests. We have about 120,000 vehicles pass through Lafayette every day, which is significantly more than our population. We have multiple state highways. I think you all saw this map at your retreat, but we are really a hub for a lot of regional transportation. And that requires a lot of coordination with CDOT, as well as coordination with neighboring communities to make sure we're advocating for the city's interests. And finally, our transit service is primarily provided by RTD. So we do a lot of work to coordinate with RTD to make sure that we have accessible transit for the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, who is going to talk about the MMTP and the Vision Zero plan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you and good evening, Council. The multimodal transportation plan is the foundation of the city's transportation system.
Do you have a mic?
I do.
You might need her nest.
It's IT might be able to turn it up.
Than you think you're talking.
I will talk loud.
Thank you.
Can you hear me better now? Still not?
You want to pull Jeff's down the
Yeah, Jess was working quite well. How about that?
That is better. Yes.
Okay.
I think that one isn't working well.
All right. The multimodal transportation plan is the foundation of the city's transportation program. The plan was adopted, as Jeff said, by council in late 2023, with implementation starting in 2024. The MMTP establishes a guiding vision for goals for preserving and improving the city's transportation network. The MMTP can be found on the city's website. A link is provided in the council memo as well as with this presentation. The community participated in the MMTP development. Through public engagement, the city received just under 900 survey responses. The community's top 3 transportation priorities are adding or enhancing off-street multi-use paths or trails, fixing broken or missing sidewalks, including widening existing narrow sidewalks, and then lastly, adding or enhancing on-street bike lanes. The community also ranked their top roadway corridors needing improvement. Colorado 7, including both the Arapahoe Road segment and Baseline Road segment, was ranked as the community's top priority, followed by Public Road. The graphic shown on this slide can be found on page 11 of the MMTP. As Jeff mentioned, the MMTP provided a guide for near-term projects. The near-term project plan covers years 2024 to 2028 and identified the funding need of $10 million in additional investment. The bulk of the funding needs identified were the expansion or creation of maintenance and asset management programs for traffic signals, roadway striping, and traffic signage. The MMTP identified 38 near-term projects for the first 5 years of implementation. Location-specific projects are shown on the map graphic, while citywide efforts are listed on the slide. These near-term projects can be found on pages 90 through 92 of the MMTP. Since implementation began in 2024, the city has completed or is in progress with over 30 of these 38 projects. The MMTP provides project prioritization for midterm and long-term planning horizons as well. The MMTP also includes a backlog of projects for implementation beyond year 2048. The Vision Zero Action Plan, or VZAP, was a near-term priority project of the MMTP. VZAP was developed to reduce severe crashes and improve multimodal safety by creating a framework for prioritizing funding for safety improvements. VZAP prioritizes roadway segments based on 4 key considerations: the crash history, crash risk, community input, and equity considerations. VZAP can be found on the city's website, and a link is provided in the memo and as well as in this presentation. VZAP established a Lafayette Comprehensive Safety Network with top priority roadway segments and intersections identified. This graphic can be found on page 26 of VZAP. The city's VZAP website includes an interactive map for the public to view the roadways that are included in VZAP and be able to see what priority rankings those roadway segments are. VZAP also includes an implementation plan to guide the city on how best to spend our limited resources on efforts and projects that provide meaningful safety improvements for the community. I will now hand off to Casey Carlson to present our asset management program.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So I'll take over with our annual asset management programs. These programs include our street and sidewalk rehabilitation projects, traffic signal maintenance and capital upgrade projects, and sign replacements, striping, and pavement markings. Most of our annual programs center around maintaining our existing assets. The table on the right displays the VZAP top 4 priorities as determined by the community. These priorities include evaluating and improving left turn movements at signals, installing backplates with retroreflective borders on signal heads, signal timing, and crosswalk visibility enhancements. So taking a look at just the annual street rehabilitation program, approximately every 5 years we conduct a pavement condition analysis. That analysis rates all of the roadways within the city and gives them a pavement condition index rating, or PCI rating. That rating is used to develop a 5-year pavement management plan where the street condition is what is determining the need for rehabilitation projects. This bar chart / pavement deterioration curve shows the city's roadway network and the applicable categories that each roadway is in. The average roadway network within the city was in the satisfactory range. We have about 20% of our roadways rated as fair, or 55 to 70 on the PCI. This fair category is also considered a critical PCI range. It is critical due to the fact that approximately 40% of our asphalt quality deteriorates within the first approximate 12 years, with another 40% drop in quality occurring just from years 2 to 14. So it's important that we catch as many roadways as we can in this critical range prior to what you can see is that pretty substantial drop off shortly thereafter. We have less than 1% of our roadways in very poor or less condition, which is also considered a deficient state in the pavement condition analysis. This deficient state is the roadways in that state are more subject to needing a full reconstruction as opposed to just a mill and overlay or a chip seal. Generally, a full reconstruction is about 5 times more expensive than a mill and overlay. So it's important, again, that we try to catch as many roads as we can in that critical range to prevent the drop off and the potential for needing to do, 5 times more expensive repair to the same roadway had it been caught earlier. So with the talk of PCI scores, this slide just shows an example of what those rankings look like. So last year with our 2025 program, we mill and overlaid North 111th Street. The photo on the left is a before photo. The score was a 41%, or in the poor category. And the red circles just highlight, you can see the alligator cracking and substantial asphalt deficiencies. And the after is what it looked like after paving when it gets reset to 100. So with our annual street rehab programs, like I said, the PCI values are primarily what's used to determine the need for roads being rehabilitated. Once they are selected based off that need, we evaluate them for PROAG compliance, MMTP improvements, VZAP improvements, and utility and other city project coordination. The approach mentioned in the MMTP regarding this is a one build approach. So the intent is to address as many MMTP, VZAP, PROAG concerns as we're able to, while we are already rehabbing the road with our annual asset maintenance programs. So examples of PROAG improvements include ADA ramps, pedestrian push buttons, and widening the sidewalks. MMTP improvements include sharrows, bike lanes. VZAP improvements include private access reconstructions, crosswalk visibility enhancements, and coordinating that work with our annual signal upgrade and capital projects. So an example of our annual traffic signal maintenance and upgrades. This is a signal that was completed at the intersection of Minotaur Circle and South Boulder Road last year. These improvements included upgrading to flashing yellow left turn signals, crosswalk enhancements, PROAG upgrades to the ADA ramps. The left turn operations and movements were evaluated. A street light was installed, retro-reflective backplates were installed, and the signal timing for both pedestrians and vehicles was evaluated. So with that, we have a quick question period for the above section, and we'll have another Q&A at the end of the presentation as well.
Great. One more section. I think implementation is the next
Yes.
place. So any questions from council here?
Just a quick, that 250 miles of streets that you mentioned in the first slide, is that only streets that we maintain, or is that everything?
Yeah, that's lane miles of city streets, and then the CDOT streets are not. No.
Okay, so do we have any responsibilities whatsoever for like 287 or any of that? Do we like clear debris, when it's on the road? What's our role?
So we do law enforcement in those corridors. We also, in many cases, CDOT will not maintain facilities outside of the curb line. So there's areas where it's a CDOT right away, but we're responsible for the sidewalks or the ramps, or in some cases drainage facilities. And one thing that continues to evolve is that as we push for more multimodal facilities, CDOT tends to ask us to take those things over as part of that. So relatively limited, but it's something that's continued to expand in that work.
So just to clarify, if something fell off somebody's truck on 287, they shouldn't call us, they should call CDOT?
Yeah, I think generally it ends up going through police dispatch, and they call it out accordingly. If it would sort of depend on the situation. If we had somebody nearby and was creating a hazard, we might very well just take care of it, but technically we can see that.
Okay, thank you. Could you just also, at some point, I don't have to have it now, we have 250 miles of city streets, and then what is the mileage for the ones where we are not responsible? How much is that?
Yeah, we'll check on that.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Gallegos?
So I had a question regarding the 5-year cycle and the PCI rating. So if a street was rated fair and was scheduled for rehabilitation, but in the year or two before the work actually begins, its condition degrades even further, does it move higher up the cycle?
It can, yeah. Prior to each year's paving program, we go through what the recommendations are and look at like the utility projects that are scheduled, VZAP, MMTP, things like that. So if the condition of a street that is further down the list, if we get calls about it or something, we will go out and take a look. And if it does deteriorate to that point where we think it takes priority over one that's planned, we will kind of just swap those out between years.
You actually had an email today from a resident who was asking about a situation where something had deteriorated, and what we ended up doing was going out and just cutting out specific areas that had deteriorated rather than doing the whole thing. So we got in, cut those out, repaved that, and then we go back and do the mill and overlay over that patch so that it's basically we don't end up with the bad areas reflecting through, but we also don't have to reconstruct the entire street.
Great, thank you.
It's a hybrid.
Councilor Polio.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this presentation. I love this. First, kudos. I live near where several of the pictures have been, and so I bike over these and drive through them constantly. The work is outstanding. I did have a question on the PCI graphic, and Councilor Gallegos articulated my question smarter than I could have, so I'll ask it slightly differently. We do get questions occasionally from residents in terms of road conditions writ large. Is there a graph, because looking at the slide in question, is there a graph version that is shared regularly with the public or could be shared regularly with the public? Because I think that specific data point that only 5.2% of our roads are currently rated as poor is a useful one to tell. And so that leads to my question in terms of how do we tell that story? I have heard from residents that occasionally when there is work done on roads, they're like, all of a sudden there's all this happening and I didn't hear about it, wasn't messaged. And so how do we communicate with the public in terms of we're going to do X work on given intersection or road? Can you just help me understand that a little bit better? Thank you.
Sort of depends. When it's a big like regional project that's going to impact a broader area, oftentimes there's variable message boards. We put things out through social media. They're well publicized. Generally, when it's something that's limited to a neighborhood, part of the contract is the contractor's responsible for putting up, parking signs and door hangers, I believe.
Yep.
So it's really more to let people know that you're going to be impacted for a couple of days. And then when we have bigger projects where there's, a broader scope, there's additional outreach. We've got a few projects we'll talk about tonight where there's been outreach that's beyond that. But typically, if it's just we're going to be there for a few hours and you won't be able to get out of your driveway for a certain range, that's usually we're providing. I think it's 72 hours usually.
Yes, our current contract for our street and concrete is they need a week minimum notice just of the work even occurring.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And just in terms of the PCI graphic, and apologies if it's something like it is already out there and I just am not
So we
remembering.
just had it updated. We have not, I don't think as of yet, converted it into a format that that we can easily put on the web just yet, but I think we did get GIS layers.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. I would love for that to, Lafayette Connection or Facebook or something just to tell the story. Like 95% of our roads are not poor. It's a good story. Yeah. Thank you both.
Councilor Gianola.
Thank you, Mayor. My question kind of relates to that same point. That that graphic with the bar chart and the curve how old is that data that was on that?
That study was just concluded in June of this year.
So that was the updated data.
Correct.
Oh, shoot.
It's just kidnapped.
Sorry about that. So that was the updated data?
Yes, it was.
And how does that compare to the previous data for that? That's really what my question is.
It was relatively comparable. Of course, we've done improvements since the last study. I think it was in 2020. We used a different company to do this evaluation, so it's half art, half science. So their overall ranking was relatively around 10% higher kind of overall. But when you compared to the actual bell curve between the two, they were relatively comparable.
So this particular round, they actually primarily used AI and just photographs, whereas the previous analysis 5 or 6 years ago was considerably more expensive and had a variety of different tools. But for what we're using it for, this seemed like a reasonable approach to narrow our focus.
Great.
I think we're ready for the next
Okay.
slides.
So we can move on to implementation. So for our 2026 annual street and sidewalk rehab programs, we have the following streets with their associated PCI rankings and VZAP rankings. Crossing Drive, Dagny Way, and Casper Drive are good examples of that opportunistic kind of one build approach that I had mentioned earlier. Their VZAP rankings aren't necessarily high, but we have to go into those neighborhoods to upgrade the existing asphalt anyway. So while there, we are making MMTP and VZAP improvements to those roadways. Again, it's the most efficient use of public disruption and dollar to address as much as we're able to while we're there anyway. Most of our PCI rankings range from poor or to that critical/fair range that I had mentioned. Again, we try to catch as many as we can in that critical range to prevent them from falling to poor or further. One outlier you may notice is Compass Avenue. It's rated as satisfactory. That is just a 200-foot long block that connects Zenith Avenue and Lambert Circle that we're already improving, and the ADA ramps are already being upgraded on either side. So again, the additional cost to upgrade it with the rest of that neighborhood is substantially lower than it would be to come back and do it in another 5 to 10 years as its own project. So trying to address as much as we're able to in an area to keep efficiencies up. To highlight one of them for this year, we have Baseline Road with a PCI ranking of critical and VZAP rankings of 8 and 18 on their respective sections. Once we knew it was selected for asphalt improvements for this year, we conducted a road safety audit as a part of the MMTP. This audit helped us determine the road's capacity and safety improvements that we could make with our rehab project for the year. Some of these improvements included reducing the driving lane widths, which help to promote slower travel speeds, and it also gives us more room for updating the bike lanes and adding buffers where possible. ADA ramp upgrades, pedestrian push button upgrades, left turn offset corrections, signage and striping updates. The road safety audit also recommended a lane drop at the intersection of Baseline and 95th Street. So part of that effort for restriping Baseline this year is to conduct that lane drop prior to the intersection.
Could you just tell me on this picture, this is Indian Peaks going west or east? Because that's the only road, I don't know which way this is going.
The photo is an aerial of Baseline Road. The
Okay.
Indian Peaks is on the west side of the photo.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Exempla Circle is another one this year with a critical ranking and VZAP rankings. Features included in the Exempla Circle upgrades include reducing drive lane widths, again to promote slower speeds and allow for bike lanes and buffers where possible. Sharrows, ADA ramp upgrades, private access reconstructions, and signage and striping updates. And Casper Drive similarly is ranked as critical with a VZAP score of 69. Some of these improvements include Sharrows, ADA ramp upgrades, signage and striping updates. And we are actually doing a roundabout reconstruction with splitter islands and adding pedestrian refuges to those splitter islands. Again, to follow that one build approach, since it's in the VZAP, and we actually heard a lot of community outreach regarding safety around these roundabouts. We're trying to address as many of those as possible while we're there anyway, conducting repaving and concrete work. This table just shows a few of our transportation projects and the various stages that they're in. I'll cover a few and highlight 2 of them, and then I'll pass it to Leslie to highlight a third. So the first one I'll highlight is a Hawk Signal project. This is located just east of the intersection of Baseline Road and Gold Hill. It has a VZAP ranking of 24 and features bus stop relocations, pedestrian refuges, a Hawk Signal, and PROAG compliant ADA ramps. We're just wrapping up the 100% plans for this project right now and are hoping to get it out to bid with construction starting this fall. Another project I'll highlight is a Missing Links project with a VZAP ranking of 32. This includes a sidewalk extension along Carr Ave from Baseline Road to the alleyway, a trail connection from Emma Street to Canterbury, and a paint and post pedestrian and bicycle improvement on 112th Street from the roundabout south to Prana Park. This is a HSIP, or Highway Safety Improvement Program, grant project funded through the FHWA. It has a 10% match of city funds for this, and the grant is for $500,000. Approximately $200,000 went towards the design. Approximately $50,000 is going towards construction management and inspection services, and the remaining $250,000 will go towards the actual construction phase for the project. This project will help address, we have just over 40 miles of missing sidewalk pieces within the city in the MMTP, and this will address about 0.4 miles of that. These grant projects, more informational, generally run a little slower than a typical project because they involve federal funding. So there's a lot of outside agencies that we coordinate with. It takes a lot of staff time just to ensure we're following the proper steps so that funding doesn't get compromised. So we ensure that we get all that for these types of projects. So with that, Leslie.
Thank you. And I'm going to provide an update on Wanaka Lake Trail. So last fall, City Council asked staff to develop an engineering design to address resident concerns on Wanaka Lake Trail, just west of Wanaka Lake near the pickleball courts. Following installation of the pickleball courts, the city received increased reports of neighborhood concerns about speeding, traffic, on-street parking, and pedestrian activity. The area was not identified as a priority in the 2023 MMTP plan, or Multimodal Transportation Plan. Wanaka Lake Trail is a collector street with adequate capacity and a posted 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. An existing marked crosswalk is provided in the vicinity of the park. Additional community input was received through the VZAP process. An additional analysis was done, and the area was included in the VZAP priorities adopted last July. VZAP identified many areas in the community with greater safety risk than Wanaka Lake Trail, which resulted in a priority ranking of 84 per VZAP, and improvements were not included in the 2026 budget process. Based on subsequent community input last fall, council directed staff to perform additional analysis and design. The city contracted with Kimley Horn, who did further engineering analysis and developed a preliminary design and cost estimate. Kimley Horn has developed a preliminary design that would remove parking and install concrete bump outs to reduce vehicle speeds and shorten pedestrian crossing distance, and would realign existing trails to consolidate pedestrian crossings at a safer location away from the curve on the road. The design includes grading, drainage, fencing, and lighting improvements. The preliminary estimate for this project is approximately $410,000. The project would most likely be advanced at such time as the Wanaka Lake Trail needs to be resurfaced. This using our one build philosophy that we've discussed previously in this presentation. It could be advanced sooner, but would require delaying projects in other areas previously identified as having greater safety or multimodal benefit for the community. And now Michelle Melanakis will present on transportation planning and our regional partner collaboration. And I'm going to bring this mic down to you. Okay, as well.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So the first thing that we'll cover is the regional projects, construction projects that we're working on. Similar to the in-house projects, these are in all phases of construction from recently completed to preliminary design. To focus on a few towards the bottom of the list, we have just finished up design of the Colorado 7 and Highway 42 intersection project with CDOT. They should have just closed the bid this week, so that should be advancing to construction. They'll have the contract initiated in the next couple months, construction probably starting next year, so we'll all be seeing the impacts of that construction next year. There are two projects on here that were not included in our near-term multimodal transportation plan. Those being the 287 safety barrier project that is primarily run through CDOT, and that came from the 287 safety study that council approved last year. CDOT received federal funding for that, so Lafayette's not contributing to that, but we are a partner in the design. And then similarly, CO42, 30% design from Pascal to Baseline Road. That is CDOT's Strategic Transportation Improvement Program funding that we were able to advocate for that money to go to Colorado 42 because it was one of the projects identified in the MMTP as ones that we would like to advance if additional funding became available, our top 10 next projects. And we were also able to use council support and public feedback from the recent collisions on Baseline to progress that with CDOT as well. And then we were also able to advocate for CDOT to fix Baseline Road from 287 to 119th. So they are adding that to their STIP funding, and that should be starting soon. And then planning projects, similar to everything else that we're doing, all of this is near-term multimodal transportation plan except for the Baseline Road safety audit. We advanced that because of the paving program and also the CO42 design. We were able to coordinate them, and it was a low dollar cost effort that comes out of our annual safety funding that was able to identify immediate implementation projects that we could do quickly. And then these are non-infrastructure projects. Most of them are citywide projects, all near-term MMTP. Plan, with the exception of the two on the bottom, are transit service. These were in the MMTP. They will be starting next year, most likely, run by the grant. They were both grants run by Boulder County, but RTD has agreed to take the CO7 BRT starter service, so that is taking a little longer to get implemented. So regional collaboration, Jeff talked about this in the beginning, but because we have those large roadway corridors, regional collaboration is largely important to make sure that our priorities are met in the regional plans. We can advocate for funding to be prioritized along with our plans. Our official actions mostly come from the Denver Regional Council of Governments. We have representation on the Technical Advisory Committee and the Boulder County Subregional Forum. And then we are a part of other workshops and committees to just stay appraised with what's going on in the community, best practices, and what other agencies are doing nearby. And then we advocate for policy and funding through the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition. And then we partner with agencies in the CDOT Region 4 communities, groups, and then we have typically separate meetings with each individual agency around us with BVSD and RTD. And then both staff and elected officials are part of 2 roadway coalitions for Colorado 7 and for US 287. And then RTD coordination has been a hot topic recently. So we do appreciate council's action on the 228 service. RTD is going to remove the suspension from the September 2026 service changes. We probably will still have to talk about changes to that route to keep it feasible long-term, but the letter was successful. Our advocacy was successful on that. We do know that they need to make a 20% budget cut in the next few years. And so it's going to be important for us to stay a part of these conversations. They tend to shift towards ridership as their main metric. It keeps them financially feasible, but also tends to lead more towards serving the Denver region, where if we use coverage as a metric, that's going to lead more to rural areas, Lafayette, our major corridors, things like that. So we probably will be looking to council to support staff and potentially advocate for service in Lafayette. The two primary projects where that will probably come up are their upcoming comprehensive operational analysis, or their COA, and then their needs evaluation project called Connect. So those two are on our radar, as well as Front Range Passenger Rail. There are three primary ways to engage through the Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition, like we talked about, letters from council to the board, and then also direct feedback at RTD board meetings. So we will probably be looking at a combination of one or all three in the future. And then just a note, folks often think that RTD runs Red Free Lafayette, but that is actually run by Boulder County. The expansion will be also, and RTD has been reducing the amount of on-demand transit that they're providing pretty much region-wide. And we have a break for questions.
Thank you. Questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that these projects are being funded. I wasn't positive that we had gotten funding for the Colorado 7 and the 287 safety project, so that's great. And just let us know, being the council liaison to the Northwest MCC, just let me know how we can support outside of, through the MCC, letter to the board, and did I hear actually going to the board meetings? Is that what I heard?
Or submitting public comment.
Submitting public comment, okay. Can do. So if I understand correctly, it's the providing service to rural communities is kind of where we are. That's okay, great. Thank you, I really appreciate this update. So.
Councilor Jensen.
So I don't want to take up all the time, but I have a bunch of questions, so maybe I'll ask two of them and then pause and let somebody else go. Does that sound okay?
That sounds okay, Council.
Okay. On the construction projects regional partner-led page, it says kickoff August 2026, and then it says estimated start March 2028. So I'm confused about what are they kicking off if they're not starting construction for 2 years?
That is the very ground floor of the initial design. So that's what they're going to kick off in August. And CDOT is including the city of Lafayette as a stakeholder, of course, and we will be collaborating on what that design is going to look like. And what I put in the estimated construction is generally when CDOT feels that they're going to go ahead and advance this through design and be ready to go to construction. So it's still a fair ways out.
So I'm the Highway 7 person, and I felt when I got on there that I didn't really have a history, and I didn't really have direction. So I think at some point it would be really beneficial to sit down with staff to know what I should be vocalizing when I'm on that committee. And if somebody starts going in a direction that is not where you guys want it to go, I should know what that is. And I don't feel I do right now. So I would really appreciate some additional work to catch me up to speed. I've been to 2 meetings thus far and raised a few issues, but those were just me, and I don't really know what y'all want. And so I would love to get some better understanding of what I should be looking for at those meetings, if I could.
Yeah, happy to do that. I just want to know, anytime if you want a briefing on anything at all, if you just let the city manager know, and she will coordinate with us to arrange that.
And it's,
whatever form works
well, we
best.
get new council people and we do that divvying up of responsibilities. And if you're on one of these regional groups for the first time, it seems to me it should be standard practice that we do something that gives whoever is representing us some guidance as to what they should be looking for. And so I just recommend that every time we rearrange those deck chairs, that somebody get informed of what to be looking for. Okay, that's one question. One more. Hold on. Oops, sorry, Sorry, I have to go through the slides. So with regard to RTD, you mentioned coverage and ridership. And I think I appreciate the difference, the way you just described it and how important that is for whoever is communicating with RTD. But in this recent 228 conversation, one of the things I realized is there were things like the YMCA and Sister Carmen that have no other bus service. And so not only was it was like disempowering to elements of our community who maybe seniors or people with disabilities who are accessing the Y, or low-income people who don't have a car who are accessing Sister Carmen, which is an evaluative sort of equity concern. Is there a way to put things like that into the conversation? This is a place where low-income people go who have no other way to get there, and that has a higher value than maybe something, where people can mostly drive. Is there a way to add those kind of things in the conversation?
Actually, the letter that Mayor Pro Tem signed on to through Northwest MCC, I think actually it specifically called out.
We did say that, but in their evaluation of which routes to cut or where to make changes, do they consider, or could we ask them to consider things like that in their consideration of they've got to make a 20% cut, and like, as I understand it, all of Superior was losing its service so if you're a person who can't drive in Superior, you basically are SOL. So how do we get that to be part of the conversation at RTD?
I think we have to advocate for it because we know our community and our needs and what these locations are, and they're looking at the entire region, so they're not necessarily going to know that a specific route has destinations that are important to the community unless we let them know. So it's definitely, that's kind of part of the impetus. We just need to really keep an eye on things and speak up.
Okay, and would it be beneficial, oops, that's a third question, but it's kind of a follow-up to this one. Would it be beneficial in any way to identify places like that have only one bus coming, and if that bus were to go away, we would be, really making it difficult for people in advance, knowing that they're going to be doing a 20% cut? Is there something we can do to be proactive, like with our RTD director, that says, here's some places that are really vulnerable, and we'd like to make sure nothing happens to those places? Is there something like that we could do?
So we have done that somewhat, but it was more on a staff-to-staff level. We haven't taken that stance with the director per se, but we can look into it.
Yeah, I don't know that we actually, one thing we can consider is, do we have a GIS layer of some of these key transit destinations so that we, as things come up, we're not relying on whoever happens to look at it that day to know that we've got some inventory of places that are most critical.
Mayor
I would just add, I think that would be very helpful, especially when we got notice about the 228 cut like a week before they, before they met, and that's when the letter came popping out. The 20% cut, yeah, they're going to have to do it because they can't sustain what's going on. And I did hear that they are less supportive of the, what are we calling, the Erie B and the Ride Free Lafayette. I think if we know how those smaller local systems could support cuts that RTD wants to make, if there is some kind of fallback on a cut of 228, it'd be good to know that as well. We don't want to have to all of a sudden create a local, try to create a local transit system or route through Ride Free Lafayette or invent an Erie B, but knowing the relationship between those, is there, on that layer, we would have maybe very vulnerable population routes, and then how that relates to Ride Free Lafayette, which you can't necessarily, it's not necessarily going to fill the gaps that something like the 228 would fill, but just giving us a clue, like, there's no way that, and with the 228, I think that was the issue, is that there's no way you could sufficiently replace that type of service with Ride Free Lafayette. So just maybe asterisks by, hey, this is going to be really a problem for residents, and not a whole bunch of work because we don't know everything that RT is going to do, but maybe give us a clue of which routes to look for. Is that helpful?
Councilor Buller.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for this part of the presentation. Similar to Councilor Jensen, I have a few questions, so I'll try to bucket them. First, on the RTD, just would foot stomp what has been shared with agreement with the Mayor Pro Tem that they have to cut 20%. That's a massive haircut, and so I appreciate the intellectual honesty that we have to meet them at some point. You can't just say no to everything since the cuts are underway, but I really take your point about Sister Carmen and strongly support. My first question is on the baseline project. You noted, Casey, that buffers where possible. I just want to understand, how do you decide where to put buffers?
There are just sections on baseline, thank you, that we're repaving this year where the existing curb and gutter narrows for whatever reason when it was built. So there's a section where we have 11-foot driving lanes, and we have buffers where we have more than an additional 5 feet between the edge of the concrete gutter pan and the drive lane, where we add a buffer. There's a couple spots where it narrows up and we can't get a buffer in. We still have a 5-foot bike lane, but there's just not enough asphalt width to get both.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful, because I know that it's an ongoing question and concern in the community in terms of having more protected bike lanes wherever possible. So thank you for that. On the hawk signal, I'm familiar with how to use hawk signals, but I don't know that everyone is. Is there signage associated with hawk signals for folks who may not know, and just kind of, because I've seen folks kind of standing for significant periods of time waiting for it to change automatically?
Yeah, I know drivers have, you can even see, they have like a kind of informational board. I'm not sure that there is one for pedestrians. I don't know. Michelle, do you know? I don't think there is.
It's just the standard push button sign on there. We are planning on putting out some educational videos on how hawks work.
Cool. Super cool. Thank you. On the Wanaka Road issue, I did want to ask the question, and I understand it's not an immediate priority, but the 410K project, but in terms of removing the parking, where do y'all expect those folks who play basketball, play pickleball, where will they park?
We would anticipate with the pickleball that they're probably going to park farther into the neighborhood, because it's still, there's areas outside of where people are parking now that are still closer to the pickleball than the main parking lot. So that's is a concern. But one of the challenges now is people are parked, close to the crosswalk, and that's difficult to manage. So basically, by having the bump outs, it at least reserves a section to make sure that people can't park too close to the crosswalk, and it also shortens the amount of time you're in the road because you're 6 or so feet.
Absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. I feel like I'm having a vision of the future where we hear a lot of concern from the public in terms of, why are all these people parking in my neighborhood? My mom's coming over and can't park in front of my house. So I wonder, is there a way for us to do most of what you're proposing in terms of that protected crosswalk, but also preserve some parking along that road?
Yeah, so
in addition to what was up there?
So it's probably losing
So the
4 to 6 spaces.
Yeah, so just right here with this concrete.
Oh, it's only 4 or 6 spaces. I can't read scale on maps, so thank you. That's helpful. Okay.
So one thing to note.
Ignore my question.
So the west side of the road will have restricted parking, also striped out, largely because of how tight that curve is. We need to have the driving public move over and not drift over into that other area. So it's the concrete bump out. But we still preserve a fair amount of parking on that street.
We did have some neighbors that were asking for it to be removed at a larger scale. And some of the challenge with that is if you don't have parking, it lets people drive faster.
Yeah.
So the on-street parking does have a traffic calming effect, and
Okay.
and
No.
also having at least some there does keep people hopefully from
Yeah.
parking.
Thank you. I love this. I apologize for misreading. And then my last question for the moment, you noted the speeding, and I've heard a fair amount of concern recently from members of the public in terms of speeding in our town. And how does speed cameras work in Lafayette? Is that y'all's department? Is that the police department? What's the intersection there?
We actually don't have speed, like photo enforcement.
Mhm. Is that something that we've explored before?
We have, it's probably a separate topic. So, yeah, so what we have currently are, we have a couple of the speed radar signs that provide visual feedback of how fast you're going.
Yeah, they're great for ignoring as you accelerate down Emma.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thing because that's something we have discussed and one of the things we've looked at, and it came up as we were discussing concerns on West Baseline Road, is you kind of have to move them around once in a while because once they're there for a period of time, like after a couple months, they sort of lose their effectiveness. We also have a speed radar trailer that we work with PD to strategically move around. There were some changes in the law related to photo radar enforcement. We're anticipating that potentially we'll start to see that move forward on 287, I believe. And when we last discussed it, where the council at that time landed was to wait and see how that goes, wait and kind of see how programs are working, how community feels about it, and revisit it at a later date. I don't know if we pick a specific date. There are kind of mixed feelings about it, so we decided to do a little bit of a wait and see and get more information.
Thank you. I would love to explore those at some point.
If I may.
Mayor Pro Tem, sure.
We did, Councilor Beaulieu, we did hash this over for a long time. And the cost of the speed radar, without having explored other measures, was one of the things we were waiting to see how effective they were. And I try not to talk a lot, but the what do you call them? The wide barriers that are going to be added in on that corner, narrowing people's perspective works every time. So that's, on that turn in particular, it's one of the things that does help. So yes, we were talking about, yes, we could do the speed radar, but we wanted to try methods that we know can also work before moving into that place. And we could definitely explore it some more. This is brilliant. I was wondering how you were going to work this out, but putting those barriers there, I think, will also give the cue to people in cars like, I can't make it through here going at the speed I'm going. So I just wanted to say, like, yes, we
I appreciate
have,
that.
and we can go back to it if this doesn't work, but no issues.
Councilor Gianella?
Thank you. Just on the speed radar topic, at the CML conference a month or so ago, there was a session on that updated law. So it was really informative. One of the things that came out of the discussion and the conversations that I had, shoot, I'm frozen again, aren't I?
We can hear you okay.
Maybe it'll come back in the next moment. Sorry about that. The conversations that I had, the feedback from the cities who have that in place was that it's more desirable to use the kind of mobile traffic cameras rather than the fixed position cameras for this ability to move things around. So kind of raising that, I think, that I would be supportive of the kind of mobile traffic speed cameras rather than a fixed position.
Councilor Jensen? Back to your
Did you
question.
want to?
No, go for it.
Okay. Well, first, I want to just comment that I worked on the legislation that established photo radar at the Capitol, and it was very controversial, and at a time when we are struggling with people not liking our flock cameras, adding another layer of lack of privacy right now, when people are very sensitive about that issue, is not something I would want to do, especially if we have other choices to create safety. People think our current license plate readers do that, that they film cars, and they don't like it. And at a time when law enforcement, at least some kinds of law enforcement, are not well trusted, it's a little scary. We will have lots of people, and we may decide we want to do it, but there'll be a lot of people in here telling us, please don't destroy my privacy. Just a heads up on that. I want to ask about the page, well, it says 31, the Safe Routes to School Action Plan, which says in progress. During the campaign, I don't know if everyone else experienced this, but I had a lot of people who felt they didn't have a safe path to school for their kid, who would talk to me and say, when are they going to add this crosswalk or that or light or whatever it would be. So I got the feeling that in our community that was really important. And so it says in progress, and I guess I haven't seen anything on it. Is it on our website right now that we're working on that? What I think communication with the public about this particular one seems really important, because a lot of people I talked to had concerns about this.
So it's not on our website right now. It's Boulder County's project. We did go after a grant to fund this, and the idea originally was that they would create a walk audit form that we could use on all of the schools in the area. And originally they were going to focus on some Lafayette schools. Since then, they've expanded their scope from just Boulder County BVSD to BVSD and St. Vrain. And so I think the project scope has changed significantly. They should be doing outreach. They should have a project website up soon. We are not like a primary stakeholder in that. We are a secondary stakeholder, so I don't have as much information or firsthand knowledge.
Well, even if we just had a notice that links them to that website on our page, I think that would be really valuable, because it seemed of great concern to people.
As soon as that is up, we will have a link in reference to it, yes.
And one more question, and then at the Colorado 7 committee, they said the BRT starter service was going to start earlier than originally planned and be this fall at one point. Has that been pushed back to 2027 now, or is it starting this fall?
It is not starting this fall.
Okay.
The last that I heard, it might be in the December, January changes, but because they're switching it to RTD, it's really subject to RTD's timelines, and so that's why I left it vague and just put 2027 as the starter, because I think January will be the earliest that starts.
Okay, so when the Highway 7 construction happens, I happen to live right off Highway 7. And as it is right now, at peak times, people are cutting through our neighborhood to avoid that intersection of Highway 7 and 95th. So they turn into our neighborhood, and then, I don't know how to draw you a picture, and then go around the park and then come back out and avoid the intersection at Arapahoe and 95th, come back out north of that onto 95th going north. We suspect my neighbors and our HOA board that is going to get worse when the construction happens in that intersection. So what can we do about, they're not going fast, it's not like they're racing through there in any sort of dangerous way, but there is a park there and a bus stop and lots of children. So there is some concern that additional traffic on a neighborhood level street that's really an arterial now is going to be a problem. So I'm wondering if there is anything we can do about that in advance to keep that from happening.
It's signalized at both ends, right?
No,
No.
not, it's avoiding the signal, that's why they're going through. There's a signal at Arapahoe and 95th, but then what is on the south side, Dagny Way, but on the north side is Cross Ridge, I think. They go through Cross Ridge and then turn right in the middle of the neighborhood and get off on 95th. And the 95th one is signaled, but the one into the neighborhood from Arapahoe has no signal. And it already happens now, because at peak times that is really congested, but I think if it's under construction, it's gonna be worse, and so I don't know if it's additional signage saying,
So we can take a look at it, and we can also bring it up once CDOT gets a contractor on board. They'll be getting a traffic control plan in place, and there may be things we can do to do supplemental signage during construction to make it a less obvious route or a less convenient route.
And I know that the HOA president brought that up when we met with CDOT during the design phase. And so that, having that connection already, I would say start talking to CDOT about it as well.
okay. The other thing I want to say is how impressed I am with this body of work that a very small staff are doing. This is a ton of amazing things, and I'm very impressed with what you have down here, and it's clear everybody works really hard, and thank you for bringing this to us and helping us to see all the many things you are doing.
Right. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just need to pile on and say, yes, it's an amazing body of work. It's always really impressed me, and so thank you for moving to the next stage. I don't know how you did it. I'm just glad you did, and it's amazing work, so thanks.
Great, not seeing any more questions. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, thank you.
We brought this one over. This guy.
Darby, I think these work better anyway, so.
Those ones, and I'll take a smaller one.
Oh. Yeah, I might have you deploy this guy while you're over there, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I didn't know, so that's not, so thanks.
Okay, I think Councilor Burley is on his way, so we can go ahead and get started for the land use code update.
Good evening, Stephen Williams, planning and building staff. Phil Kleiser and I are here tonight to provide an update on where things stand with the land use code. The agenda includes a staff presentation. We'll go through background, planning commission's recommendation, and next steps, as well as council discussion. The objective is to update council on the land use code adoption process and seek feedback on the proposed schedule, as well as planning commission's recommended updates. Council feedback is requested on the proposed schedule, including the deferred effective date and a joint planning commission city council work session. Planning commission unanimously recommended the code be adopted. Copies of their resolution have been distributed tonight. Planning commission had 17 recommended conditions, and after an extensive review that spanned 2 public meetings and something like 12 or 13 hours of discussion. Roughly 11 of the 17 code changes can be made immediately should council support them. These are the updates that staff would like to focus on tonight. Planning Commission also specifically noted a desire to discuss OTX zoning further and want to explore whether there is a need for OTX 3 zoning in particular, and that's part of their request for that joint workshop. Staff also recommend or welcomes any additional questions and feedback from council. So as a brief reminder, the goals of the land use code update include implementing Legacy Lafayette, making the code both more user-friendly and predictable, and right-sizing the development review process. Lafayette's land use code update, kind of as a reminder, was restarted with Clarion in the fall of 2024. This effort has included a code assessment, 3 draft modules, several community engagement meetings, as well as time for public review of the consolidated draft and zoning map. The working group, which included Planning Commission, met several times and played a critical role in this update. Oops. We are currently in the final adoption phase of the process, which included Planning Commission's review and recommendation, those 2 public meetings that I mentioned. They were held on June 24th and July 8th. The next steps include 2 readings by City Council. The proposed schedule is summarized here. After tonight's workshop, City Council will consider the land use code on first reading on August 18th. Staff will incorporate code changes that City Council indicates support for tonight into the draft code for that first reading. Should Council support the joint meeting with Planning Commission, staff would look to schedule that workshop for early September and then bring back to Council for second reading the code adoption on September 15th. The deferred effective date that we're requesting, item 6 there, would allow for additional public outreach regarding areas in the city that'll be more impacted by the proposed zoning and land use updates. Staff has also identified that 90-day period as an opportunity for additional code refinements that might arise through council's review or result from the recommended joint PC meeting with City Council. If, for example, changes to the OTX zoning are identified, they could be accommodated through a second ordinance that is sequenced to coincide with that 90-day period and be effective at the same time. Before we get to PC's discussion and recommendations, I thought it'd be helpful to quickly share some of the questions that Planning Commission raised during their first code hearing, really about the process. Commissioners asked several questions on how the code may continue to be refined in the future and expressed concerns over the finality of adopting the code. which has been years in the making, and we're doing for the first time in 40 years. So Clarion explained that code refinements are expected with any new code, and that updates should be expected within the first few years. The large lift of the code update, however, is happening now. Staff also clarified that minor code amendments can be processed as quickly as 3 to 4 months, and shared 3 examples, which many of you may remember. Those are the SPAR amendment allowance, the elimination of special use review for self-storage in our commercial zoning, and the expiration of applications. Council has also, Council has also already expressed a desire to study building height allowances more thoroughly, and that could be done at a later time as well. More significant code studies than that 3 or 4 month period that would require consultant support or community engagement could take several months to complete. The code amendments would follow the same process, approval steps that this full code update has taken. Would require PC review and council approvals along with those public hearings. And then I also wanted to clarify that flexibility is also built into the new code. So we've had some comments over whether or not certain of our new standards, lot sizes, building parameters, those type of things are correct. But those, we've built in both a 10 and a 25% modification allowance. So the 10% is an administrative level review, and 25% would go to planning commission and city council. So we have some allowance to adjust those, and then over time, if we're getting a bunch of 25% adjustment requests, we're going to go back and update the code so that we don't have to have those. And then lastly, staff recognizes that this is the first, kind of echoing what I said already, but just to kind of drive it home, we don't intend to wait 40 years for another land use code update, so we'll be doing more frequent ones as we need them in the immediate future, but we won't be doing one 40 years from now either, hopefully.
2026. 60. Phil Kleisler, City's Planning and Building, thank you very much. We're going to just kind of briefly walk through the Planning Commission recommendations. Those were outlined as an attachment to your memo, but just providing just a little more context. As Director Williams mentioned, most of these can happen with that first ordinance, and so if we don't hear any concerns with those particular items from the Planning Commission, from Council this evening, we can go ahead and get those ready for your first reading. The others are kind of a mix of first or second ordinance versus council discussion at a future date. So just walking through the various recommendations. The first one relates to public land dedication. So public land dedication, or PLD, refers to an existing requirement that new subdivisions must dedicate a portion of land to the city for public use. And so it varies by use. And so residential is required to dedicate 15%, whereas it's lower for commercial and industrial at 12%. And the current code limits these for the purposes of that currently to parks and recreation, with 80% of that land dedicated being used for things like playgrounds and picnic areas. And so that first recommendation relating to PLD is really about the expanding that allowed use. And so the community input, as well as the Lafayette Open Space Advisory Board, or LOSAB, supports allowing both parks and recreation and open space to count as PLD. And so what this would do, this recommendation would formally add open space in addition to parks and recreation as a public land dedication. The second relates to the credit for private recreational facilities. And so while those facilities may potentially reduce demand on public parks, they are also not publicly accessible. And that's raised some concerns, especially, particularly for some development projects that have taken place over the previous years. And so the Planning Commission recommends reducing those credits with the final amount of that reduction determined by council. The third relates to what the city will accept for PLD. So we want to avoid receiving any land that has little public value, so things like detention ponds, medians, and unusable strips of land. And so this recommendation would just make that clear and add specific code language stating that those areas are not acceptable for dedication. And then lastly, that fourth row relates to LoSAB's role in the review. And so currently, applications for larger projects, typically those are annexations that have some larger open space impacts and dedication, is referred to LoSAB for review and comment. But this recommended condition would clarify that that is a mandatory review for annexation, since those are the applications that are typically larger, typically include that land dedication, and potentially more impacts to existing or future open space. The second recommendation relates to the Parks and Open Space Zoning District. So today, most city-owned land is zoned public, and in the draft code, we've pulled out parks and recreation lands that the city owns into its own single district in order to then apply appropriate uses and standards. Through the adoption process, we've heard that from community members and others that it's more beneficial to actually further separate those out into a separate parks and a separate open space district. This would allow us to better tailor the uses and the standards to those particular uses. And the zoning map then could show, and this is just an example that we would show you, in this case, parks as one color, teal, and open space in green. This could help visually distinguish those and also help provide the appropriate regulations for each. The third is data center requirements. And so this is, as council is pretty well aware, this is a major emerging land use issue, really requiring clear definitions and restrictions. So without a clear definition and restriction, an applicant could come to the city and argue that their data center application is most similar to this other use, like a warehouse that's allowed more broadly. And so putting it in the code, defining where it can be and establishing some specific standards is helpful in avoiding that situation. The code right now, as it's written, the draft code does include a definition shown here. They would be allowed in the M3 heavy industrial zone district through a special use review, and there's a number of specific use standards, including it needs to be within a building, maximum size, residential buffering, and so on. And so the Planning Commission supported having that definition so it's in the code and it's clear, but there's also a recommendation for council to consider a temporary moratorium on data centers that we'll get to in just a moment. The next is advanced air mobility. So this is an emerging technology, kind of the full circle of like that flying car from like 100 years ago in the 70s. And it's a highly automated, high-tech aircraft, essentially some of them look kind of like large drones that can move passengers and cargo. The applications of this appear to be to range from small package delivery to potentially shorter range taxi service and regional trips as well. The FAA, it looks like, has given some exemptions for a handful of companies to start doing some R&D in the US. But in terms of the regulatory framework, it appears pretty similar to like an airport where the FAA governs the airspace, the licensing, certification operations, where we retain the land use control. So where they're sited, the zoning, the building code, and so on. So Planning Commission's recommendation was to get it in the code. There's also a recommendation for a moratorium that we'll touch on in just a minute. But based on that Planning Commission recommendation, we could explore something like allowing it as a special use review similar to the data centers in that heavy industrial zone district. We could put some additional standards on in the interim if we wanted to, things like hours of operation, hover duration, and so on. And then as part of that moratorium, we could do further research on this topic and consider what specific regulations are most appropriate for the city's goals. Additionally, it's probably something that we can consider as part of our long-range planning as well, whether that be our multimodal transportation network, as well as just comprehensive planning overall, since this is something that will probably be evolving in the now and into the future. So with Old Town lot consolidations, the intent with this recommendation was to really look at the preservation of Old Town, the existing and the historic scale. And so currently in our current code citywide, An applicant may request what's called a lot merger, so basically just removing a lot line, so 2 lots become 1, and so on. That's done administratively through a minor subdivision. What's proposed here, though, is a limit to that in Old Town. So the draft code, as it's written right now, would limit that to 30,000 square feet, or the average size of all existing lots on the same block, whichever is smaller. Anything larger than that that would be merged would require city council review. And then the planning commission in their discussions ultimately recommended that that number be reduced down to 21,000 square feet. This is a fairly straightforward recommendation. In one of our tables in the code, we have a reference to a collectiveflex. This is a very Lafayette term, and I don't think anyone else uses it. And so there was a note that we should probably define it. And so we have a very robust list of definitions in the draft code. And so this would essentially refer back to the comp plan and then put the description from the comprehensive plan of a collectiveflex into those definitions. And so this is word for word from the comprehensive plan. With neighborhood meetings, this would allow the director to require a neighborhood meeting when one is not otherwise required. And so there's a number of application types, a number of administrative application types as well that don't require a neighborhood meeting. However, there might be an instance where one is beneficial to the public process, and so this would at least allow the director to make that call and require the applicant to do a meeting. As a follow-up to that, another recommendation, number 8, would require the applicants to then submit a record of that meeting and for us to put it in the planning commission and council packets just to enhance the transparency and have a typical process like that. Number 9 is a number of different points to look at for more analysis. One is building height. And so the current practice of measuring height in the city is by measuring it from the finished grade to the roof. This is basically the ground elevation after everything is built. The draft code changes that to the existing grade, so before any of the construction happens. Planning Commission had a discussion. We got feedback from folks in the development community and so on. And the Planning Commission is recommending a more nuanced approach to that, whereas we would measure from existing grade for single lot or infill projects, but we would use the final engineered grade for the larger projects that need a different grading to address things like drainage and site design. And so the existing grade for a large scale site won't necessarily work for utilities and everything else. And so that's a more nuanced approach to that. We're also hearing that we should really look at the lot sizes, setbacks, dimensional standards, especially for our residential building types. So that's something that we as staff have started doing since that Planning Commission meeting, and we'll continue doing that work just to make sure that the standards get the intended outcome that we're hoping to achieve. The next relates to cottage court and courtyard developments. So that's recommending expanding that use with some consideration to size limits to the manufactured housing community, as well as the Old Town and the FN, the Forum neighborhood, which is our new neighborhood zone district. They also recommended that we explore how greenhouse gases and greenhouses and nurseries could be allowed as a limited use in the Old Town or OTX district. And then lastly, to explore how short-term rentals can be allowed or controlled in the manufactured housing community district. Wrong computer. So on the topic of manufactured homes, there was a comment made and a conversation at Planning Commission about what happens when someone has to replace a mobile home and are the standards set up so that they can replace it. So the issue being that over the years, mobile homes have generally grown in size. And so if there's a smaller, older mobile home that needs a manufactured house that needs to be replaced, if there's only a larger size, do they run into any space issues? We looked historically that the size has increased around the 70s, and we took a sample in Lafayette and it kind of shows that trend. There is a 15-foot requirement of separation between these homes, and that accounts for a 10-foot separation plus an additional 3 to 5 feet for the deck leading into the mobile homes. This is a fire safety consideration, and it was important as we're talking with our staff, particularly after this planning commission meeting, because the city, state regulations govern the construction of these, so we can't require fire-rated walls, sprinkler systems, and so on. So the spacing actually became fairly important. And so in this case, we would recommend retaining that 15-foot separation, but certainly open to looking at any creative case-specific exemptions that we can ensure they're able to replace that mobile home, but we can do so in a way that's safe fire-wise. The two moratoriums that we mentioned were really to give the city some breathing room, six plus months probably, where we would not accept an application for these two types of uses, to allow the city to do some additional research on what are the regulations we need to meet our goals, and bring that forward to council before any application could be brought in. There was also a discussion and a request. This is one of the key kind of questions that we have for council this evening on a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. This would be to discuss, there's a number of topics in the recommendations that we could discuss. I think the biggest one that we've heard from, both in public comment and probably at the meeting itself, relates to the Old Town standards. Specifically the different districts that we have, the regulations apply to those different districts. It's potentially combining two of those, the central Old Town OTX1 with the southern portion of the transition zone OTX3. And the Planning Commission has recommended this study session to really dig into that and potentially other topics. But before then, staff would do some additional analysis around just some existing conditions. So like, what are the lot sizes in this area? The alleys, the curb cuts, the heights, the building uses, the parking areas. Try to have a more complete picture so that council can have an informed conversation with the Planning Commission and ideally come to a resolution where you're looking at these regulations and you can let staff know what are the goals you're trying to achieve. And based on that, we can get a revised set of those standards in before that effective date comes. So we won't be getting applications on the code that the council and Planning Commission is not comfortable with. The neighborhood center is another requirement that new neighborhoods include at least one neighborhood center per every 40 acres of development. Those would include 30,000 square foot of commercial space, and they can include a market analysis that would either reduce or eliminate that requirement. There was some discussion around clarifying that language as a neighborhood center and questions around some additional flexibility for dispersing those around the site as well. Public comments from this have been kind of a push and pull. So we have members of the community that view having a neighborhood center in these new neighborhoods as a central, key, important part of having a complete neighborhood. We also hear from the development community that it's really hard to do this just with the feasibility of that size of a development, and that it's hard to fill commercial space sometimes. And so we're seeing some real push and pull. And so the regulations, we've tried to kind of have a good meet in the middle kind of approach. Then there was additional conversations around the city taking a look at the development review process, really process mapping it and ensuring that it's going to run smoothly. And that would be something that would be another topic that we could discuss at the potential joint study session with Council and Planning Commission. And then we'll land on the next step slide. And so right now we are anticipating a first reading on August 18. If council is willing to, we could schedule a workshop with Planning Commission first week of September, if that works, and then move on to second reading, and then that 90-day period to allow for those final changes. And then we'll land on those questions that Director Williams brought up at the beginning of the presentation. Thanks so much for your time.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions to run through, and if I could have Councilor Gianola back on the screen, that'd be fantastic. Before we do, are there any questions for staff on any of the presentation? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. About the aerial craft that would be moving things around. So I heard very clearly from the FAA that they control the national airspace. So where does that go if we allow these craft and the FAA is controlling the airspace, who's got jurisdiction over what they got to do, what they have to do? I know you probably don't know the answer, but did the FAA, like, what do they say about this? Do they?
This is one that we have to research more, so we're not the experts on this right now, and I think we would probably look at this similar to like an airport or a helicopter landing pad, things like that, where we do have something that touches the ground that we're able to then like regulate that as a land use, right? Yeah.
We're able to regulate that pad, but as soon as they take off, we don't regulate them once they're in the air.
That's our understanding, yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem, my understanding was that the FAA's jurisdiction starts several hundred feet up. And I don't know if these little TIE fighters and Jetson things are going 1,000 feet in the air. Probably not, because then they'd be interfering with small craft. So, an interesting.
Well, we can assume.
Yeah.
It's not clear to me how high they fly, or want to fly, especially if they need to go, how far they're going. Because at some point, like if we don't have a control over where they're actually flying, and the FAA is like, well, as long as you're below 5,000 feet, it's fine. I have a lot of questions about that.
We do too, and there's a lot of what ifs, and it seems to just be very evolving, and there's even businesses now that are looking at expanding into package delivery and things like that, and so there's a lot of questions that we have as well, and so that's why it probably would be helpful to have that time to be able to do further research.
And just to be clear, we get to decide if we're going to permit it. We could put in our land use code that we want to zone these areas for these craft.
That's our understanding right now. I think it would be similar to permitting an airport or a landing pad for a helicopter.
Right. Yes.
And I'm just going to say to the rest of the council, my understanding from the FAA was that they don't control what flies as long as it flies safely. I'm just going to throw that out there. So this is very interesting. I'd love to hear more that you find out.
Yep.
The second thing is, did we talk about water use for the data centers? Is there anything in the code?
So I think in general, we're taking the approach that if maybe we get feedback on whether or not there's support for a moratorium. Typically, when you set a moratorium, you have to set a reason for it, and that would be additional research. So it's very clear that we would need additional research for the air mobility hubs. For data centers, we were starting on a definition and starting on some restrictions, and we probably need to leave it at that level and then research what, but to answer your question, from what I've had a couple of conversations about this, and we've had some at Planning Commission, but this one, from what I understand, is advancing pretty quickly, where they have closed water systems where they're recirculating their water to try to get around the impacts that we can control. They're actually using I think it's, I hate to be wrong about this, but the gentleman I talked to at one of my daughter's events that permits these said that they are using nuclear energy in small capacities, so that they're not actually using electrical either. So us getting our heads around how we actually, because our first reaction was we can make sure that they're not using too much water, or we can bill them for that. But if they're so advanced now that they have the means to not be impactful from a typical land use perspective, then we have other things to consider before we know how to regulate them properly. So.
And we could say you've got to be self-contained. You can't.
Yeah. Yep.
You either bring the water or don't ask for any.
Right. Yeah.
And power usage, they've got to prove that they're not going to impact
the grid,
the community.
Yeah. So, because anecdotally, from what we understand, the ones that do exist in Colorado now, do pull, and so there's surges in areas. So they're, currently as we know them, they have some impacts, but I think that they're advancing pretty quickly to limit those impacts from what I've heard. So.
Okay. Thank you.
No expert though. We're just scratching the surface on this one too.
I appreciate it. I just needed to get those questions out. Thank you.
Councilor Beaulieu.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all very much for the presentation and all the tremendous work on this effort. My first question is, if we were to request that the joint meeting with Planning Commission occur before first reading, how would that unfold?
So I think that we would be looking, I've been a thorn in everyone's side in terms of like scheduling meetings because it has shifted. But we would be looking, we could look to do that. I think the advantage as we saw it, and there's pros and cons on both sides, is that if we get, we're trying to kind of hone in on, like if we get these 11 conditions kind of agreed to, then you guys can have a meeting and talk about the code holistically, hear from our consultant here, the presentation we gave to Planning Commission in June. And then if you identify anything else, you can add that to that list of topics to talk to Planning Commission about. So that's why we scheduled it that way, but I don't think you're beholden to that schedule by any means, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the other option too, so right now what we're proposing is that delayed implementation date so that the planning commission, anything that stems from that can be a additional ordinance that then all interplays for December 15th implementation. Another option that you could have if you just wanted the full code to just be all wrapped up in a bow with anything that your joint meeting may come out of it with is just don't adopt anything until later this year, right? So there's an option where you get 90% and it still goes into effect of December 15th or whatever we end up, landing on, and that 10% comes a month before but still gets implemented December 15th. Or you say, I want to get this as close to perfect as we want, and therefore I want anything incorporated from that planning commission, and give staff and the consultants time to incorporate that harder piece so that you have that. So just wanted to give kind of two different options.
Sure. Thank you. I'll hold my perspective on that until we get to the discussion portion, but thank you very much for the answer on that. You noted in terms of the mobile home regulations, the 15-foot. Is there any reason that we wouldn't do the 15-foot or any bad impact on the community in question from 15 feet? Just trying to see why we wouldn't just, yes.
Well, so the concern was that the mobile homes are like any other housing are growing in size, and that there was concern as to whether or not you could still get the same size replacement, and that we would have like a situation where we lost a mobile home and you couldn't replace it because 15 feet was too restrictive.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, we'll look into it but we didn't want to commit to anything because we knew fire and building regulations applied, and it is pretty precise. So you need more like a 4-foot landing to walk up to the side of a mobile home that's combustible. The mobile home itself is combustible. You need 15 feet of separation. So that's where that comes from. So
thank you. That's what I was afraid of. I'm struggling with this one because I would hate for
right.
And then it can't be replaced.
The preliminary research I did on this, and again, never had to do that before, but like they do seem to range in size. Like I just think that they're growing in size because families grow and we as Americans want larger things, and that's the same for housing types generally too. So, but from what I found, you can get pretty small mobile homes too. So I don't know that that's going to be the restriction. It's going to be more of I would like to replace it with a larger home, and they may not be able to. But the other thing I guess I'd clarify on that is we haven't had this issue. This has not been an issue to date. So I don't want it to be an issue in the future, but I don't necessarily know that we have a problem that we need to fix here either. So
great. Thank you. And I'll hold fire on the remainder. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions before we get into discuss? Councilor Jensen.
On the lot size for combining lots, you have this 30,000 square feet or the average size on the block, whichever smaller. And then Planning Commission recommending to reduce that to 21,000, page 16 of your document. At least that's what it says on my screen. What was the rationale or reasoning behind Planning Commission's wanting to lower that, especially if you're doing the whichever smaller option? What's that all about?
I can't speak to how much consideration was given to the whichever was smaller. I think the 30,000 square foot limit was reacted to in terms of being too big. The context we gave is most of the lots in Old Town are around 7,000 square feet in size. So they're 50 feet wide and 140 feet deep. And that would allow for 3 lots to be combined. So that seemed contextually reasonable to them. So that's where that recommendation is coming from, so.
Okay. And so they'd still be able to merge conceivably if it was over 21,000 feet. It would just have to come before what, it would come before planning commission and council? Is that-
Yeah, and so, yeah, to be completely clear, the only regulations we have and the only regulations I think I've ever worked with are subdivision regulations, where if you're gonna subdivide over a certain amount of lots and take 1 lot and create 3, basically like have one allowance for development. You can build 1 house on 1 lot, and you want to subdivide it and create 5, and all of a sudden you get 5 houses. That is an impact, right? So at a certain threshold, subdividing has always gone to planning commission and city council. There's never been a regulation that tells you how many lots that you can go from 5 to 1 and build something bigger. But for Old Town, we recognize that could be impactful. And so this is a net new regulation. Right now, it's all, you want to combine, 100 lots into 1. That's administrative under our current code because there's no cap to it. So this is a very specific Old Town regulation that we've put in order to make sure that when we get something like this, or if we got something like this, again, it's kind of like mobile homes. We haven't had this as an issue yet, but it could be. And we'd rather have it be a discretionary review than administrative.
Okay, thank you. So on page 18, with regard to neighborhood meetings, when you say neighborhood meetings are optional or not required currently for some application types, would you give me the examples of those types?
The main conversation that we had about this one was annexations. And our code isn't great right now in terms of clarity as to whether or not that triggers, because it pairs it with a rezoning application. And the rezoning application in a separate area of the code explicitly says you don't have to have a neighborhood meeting for this. And so it says follow rezoning. And so we've had this conversation because generally an annexation is coupled with it's at least coupled with a rezoning, and then it may be coupled with a development application. So neighborhood meetings have occurred along with an annexation, but we also have like the state regulation kind of balance to strike. This is a very long answer, I apologize. But we really can't start taking in application materials or like requiring a review until they hit those first 2 steps of an annexation because they're not in our jurisdiction. So a neighborhood meeting for an annexation, the conversation with planning commission was that it doesn't necessarily make sense unless we get it with, like, the Kensington application, for example, is coming in with a bunch of development associated with it, redevelopment or a rezoning, as well as a PUD right now. And so there's context, and there's also practicalities. Somebody just comes in and says they want to be in Lafayette. The questions that we're getting at those meetings aren't about being in Lafayette. It's like, what do you want to develop in Lafayette? And so until we have that context, those neighborhood meetings have not been may not be terribly fruitful. But we also have an opportunity, or as a requirement, they have to get through, is it 3?
Yeah, the 2,
3 meetings.
3 public hearings.
Yeah.
3 public hearings, 2 in front of city council and 1 in front of planning commission.
So the public does have an opportunity to come and talk to and comment on the proposal regardless of whether or not they have a neighborhood meeting to discuss it, so.
So you see how long it took you to
Yep.
explain that to me?
That's just me, though.
That
yeah.
where appropriate is really vague. And I
Yeah.
think if the public is reading this and just sees the where appropriate, they don't really understand what you just described. I get it, but I think that needs a little,
Well, and this is like an additional guardrail. So it's like right now we don't have anything that says, it says I can waive neighborhood meetings, but it doesn't say that I can require them. And so we've added this as a balance to that. And if we ever had an application that we felt that, we should get this out in front of the public because there's going to be a lot of interest in it, that's where that
but I
trigger can
think
now
it
be.
needs more than where appropriate. I
Okay.
think it needs some
Context.
explanation
Okay.
of what the kinds of conditions under which you would require that.
Understood.
Not that we don't trust you, but, this has to last another 40 years, right?
Okay.
Wait a minute, hold on, I think I had a couple of other questions. Okay, on the mobile home replacement. So when you're saying that mobile homes are regulated by the state in terms of fire and safety issues, do you know enough about those regulations to know that 15 feet actually is what the code requires because they are, or are you just guessing?
No, that's what we talked to our chief building official. That's a
Okay,
building code
okay.
requirement.
All right. And I mentioned this to you in a separate meeting, but I really appreciate the mobile home zoning, but I think we need some clarifying language that you could replace a mobile home with a permanently affordable unit. And so I just want to be on the record as saying that, as Boulder is doing with the Ponderosa mobile home community, where they're replacing older mobile homes with affordable homes that are modular and are helping people to buy their own home, stick-built home. I think I would, and maybe this is should be in the conversation, the discussion part, so I won't keep talking about that until we get to discussion. Let's see if I have any other questions. My cursor is not very accurate, sorry, it jumps around. Nope, that's all the questions I have.
Great. Any other, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a point of clarification, if we, when we do, I'm going to say that we should meet with Planning Commission. The sub-area plan, how does, I know it's not done, and we're still, I don't know if we've got the consultants on hand, but at that meeting, is it fairly clear what impacts the outcomes of that plan would mean when we're looking at OTX3? Because I know there's a lot of space between where Old Town ends and the sub area starts, kinda. So do we know what?
Not yet. So
Okay.
we just, that project has a few phases. The first phase was looking at like, where are we now? So the
Right.
existing conditions, we wrapped that up. And we just kicked off really last week publicly, the visioning phase. And so we're just now starting that process. And so we probably won't know till later in the year, and when we have a more narrowed down, and we'll be visiting with council on that as well. Once that plan is adopted though, one of the implementation projects typically is looking at the zoning code as an implementation. And so there'll probably be some tweaks to the code to implement that plan.
Okay, and PC's aware of this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Gianello?
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank the staff and the Planning Commission for all the many, many hours that they've put in on this project. It's been a lot of work. I've been involved along the way as a member of the Land Use Code Working Group before I was elected to council, but have continued to attend the meetings. And there's just been a tremendous amount of work put in to get us here, and I'm excited that we're close to the finish line. I have a few questions. First, I want to ask about the outreach during the 90-day deferred effective date period. What's planned there? What does outreach mean? Who does it go to? What's the outcome of the outreach?
Great question. So the 90-day period for outreach is really to reach out to areas where significant rezonings are going to occur. Black Diamond might be the easiest example, and we're getting comments on that. So, that area is going from industrial to AMX2. We would reach out to them, and part of that exercise is really understanding what use is in those buildings, because that's the first piece. So we need to get an understanding of what they're using their building for, and then staff would need to make an assessment as to whether or not that's still an allowed use or becomes a non-conforming use, and then explain to these business owners, property owners, what a non-conformity means. So the initial reaction we had from some was that their use would be prohibited, and while that's not I mean, I think a straight reading of the code means it is, but it becomes a nonconformity. So it's a legal nonconforming property. When it could be the building that's nonconforming, it could be the use that's nonconforming. But explaining what that means, and that doesn't mean that they have to go away. But it does mean that, like, as you transition one, type of area, a residential area, to what's supposed to be more adaptable commercial, those uses are supposed to transition over time. And to transition, for us, it's like if they lapse in use for 12 months, then they would need to come into conformance when they came back in with a new use. And then there's also restrictions on building expansions and use expansions. As long as, those use expansions are more in that industrial kind of lane. So.
And how does that come back to, when you do the outreach, how does that, I think I'm frozen again.
So, yeah.
Come on, fingers crossed, I come back.
We would contact them now, and the timing.
Hello, I hope this works. Okay.
We can still
There
hear
we
you,
are.
sorry. So
Okay.
can you hear us all right?
I do now, yeah. So how does that come back? When you do the outreach, what happens after that?
We would send them, and we've been starting these discussions about what that letter looks like. But it is kind of a conversation that we'd be starting, and then let them know what the change is, and actually let them know what the use allowances in AMX zoning are, and then invite them to have a conversation. So some of those conversations we've had so far, they're just concerned that they would be, certain businesses are concerned that they'd be limited to expanding in the future. They don't have anything necessarily that they're about to do, but that's a concern to them that they couldn't expand, 5 or 10 years from now.
Do you envision coming back to council with recommended changes potentially based on some of that?
Yeah. I mean, we want to look at them all. I mean, we don't necessarily know the whole lay of the land out there. Some of those uses may be more in adaptable commercial lane. It may be a use that is it's kind of like what Phil was explaining earlier. Like if we don't have a data center definition, right? If we don't have a definition for one of those uses, we'd have to look and see if it's most like something else and whether or not the impacts of that use. So just even understanding what some of those businesses are, how many vehicular trips they generate on a given basis, whether or not they're actually doing deliveries, if they have a negative impact on their surrounding area, because that area has become more residential over time, that's what we'd be evaluating.
I see, okay. On that topic of data centers and air mobility, help me understand a little bit better about why there's a recommendation to add this to the code, but then a moratorium potentially. I just feel like that's a conflict in my mind that you'd add it and then sort of take it away.
We could certainly just go with the moratorium. I think there's basically layers of zoning that we're getting at, like having a definition puts us in a better protected place, and that's what we are recommending doing. I don't know that, moratoriums usually come from somebody besides the planning department, requests for them. So not that we don't support it, it's probably a good idea. These are very new uses, but that's where we were landing. So we don't have to make any change though to the code or add any definition to it. If the moratorium is recommended, we could come back to that at a later date.
I see, but you said that adding the definition actually puts us in a stronger position. I just want to kind of, for the record, elucidate that a little bit more.
Not the definition so much as just creating a land use for it and then putting it as only in M3, which is our highest heavy industrial use, and requiring a special use review. So that's where we landed because we had done some analysis on data centers, and in order to put us in a good position and a safe position, that's what our recommendation was. But we could, who knows what we come out of this with? If they end up being less impactful and there's some benefit to them, then maybe that use expands. Who knows? So.
I see. Okay. I just have a couple more questions. I want to talk about the OTX zone discussion. You mentioned it early, and then I didn't see it on the list of questions. So first, I'm confused where OTX 3 came from. I was involved in the working group. We never saw that in the working group's presentation of the code, where did that come from?
So it came from staff, and it came from our analysis of what we're trying to achieve based off of like looking at the comp plan. And so OTX, is mentioned broadly in the comp plan as Old Town mixed use, just like industrial's mentioned, and it's mentioned as a collective flex. But we only have one zone district for industrial now, and our analysis of what we need for the city to be more nuanced was 3 different industrial zone districts. So we looked at Old Town and we came up with a minimum of like 2 and possibly 3 different areas of, and I think, right now OTX covers baseline, which I think everyone would agree is different than public road. We also looked at whether or not East Simpson actually needed its own OTX standard because it feels different than public and feels different than baseline. But ultimately what we felt was that, somewhere around Emma Street, there is a north and south kind of break where lots get bigger. Some of those form-based standards that we're trying to implement change. Like there's not as much alley access. There's a lot of, like similar to baseline, there's a lot of access that has to come from the street. But if you look at those lot sizes, I mean, that was where these things just start getting bigger, lots in general. So everything north, like as I mentioned earlier when we talked about the lot combination discussion, most of the lots in the northern portion of Old Town are 7,000 square feet or some version of it. Like they've been developed as 2 lots and they're 14,000 square feet, or they've been developed as 3 lots and they're 21. Once you get further south, these lots get bigger. I have the numbers here. Let's see. All the way up to 104,000 square feet. But south of Emma, we got lots that are 60,000, 26,000, 15,000, 20,000, 40,000, just under 30 for 2. And then once you get onto that 700 block of public, there's only two lots that have been developed as 7,000 square foot lots. The rest of them are either combined as 2 lots together at 14, and there's one that's 21,000 square feet. So that's where we drew that break, but it is a lot to like, it's a fairly nuanced discussion, which we'll prepare for and try to give you guys a better overview for, if you want to have it. And I think one of your questions too is, you didn't see this in the presentation. This was one of the things that Planning Commission talked about a lot, but didn't have like a specific code change recommendation. They've made the recommendation that they have a joint work session with you to discuss it further. Full disclosure, they had like the straw poll vote at that meeting. I don't know if you were still there or not. I was facing the other direction. But it was like a 4-3 vote as to whether or not they felt OTX 3 was needed. But they gave a specific direction as to what like spatial analysis they want to see in terms of lot sizes, building sizes, alley access, all of those things, in order to have that discussion with council at a joint session.
And that kind of brings me to my last question about the joint session. I think Council Bullier earlier kind of asked about the scheduling. I guess I'll ask the question in a slightly different way. Just why are you recommending scheduling it in the order that you are, and not have the joint meeting first before the first reading? What are the advantages that you see coming from that order?
Yeah, so I mean, the answer I had, and I don't know that there's a different answer from my perspective. It's just that we wanted council to have an opportunity to hear the whole code update and identify anything that they wanted to add to that discussion. So like what we'd like to get out of that joint meeting is basically anything that both council and planning commission want staff to work on as part of that second ordinance. Like if we're going to need another code update and we follow this path and you guys act on this version of the code in September, then we're going to have direction to do another code amendment, and we want to make sure that that's comprehensive. And I felt like that would put you in the best position to give us all of that feedback by having the one presentation from council before you do that. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you guys are more comfortable with meeting with planning commission first, we can certainly do that. I think. I have to check with scheduling. I haven't
Thank you so
exhausted
much.
patience
Yeah.
yet, I don't think. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm happy to wait on anything else till there's discussion. So thank you so much.
So the procedural timing question, based, since that's what we're talking about, the public is going to be notified of potential changes to the zoning of their property after we've already made decisions. And I wonder if between the first reading and the second reading, so that if somebody has a real concern about a change to their property, they could come in and talk to us. I feel like if I got a notice that my zoning of my property had changed and I had no opportunity, I busy running my business and I didn't know this was even happening, and I had no opportunity because it was a done deal already to talk to people. And there may be things, I know some of us have spoken to some small business owners who, the issue of expansion, as you mentioned, Director. Maybe there are others who have things we hadn't thought of, just that it might be good to get into the mix before we finalize things. So would it be, and I don't know what other council members think about that, but would it be possible in the schedule that you have drawn up to add a time to communicate with the public before we make our final decision and give them notice of potential change?
It depends on how long you want that notice to be. So we're suggesting 90 days, and I don't know, that might be too tall of a task to accomplish in 90 days. It may just be just fine. Like, I don't know how many people are going to respond and have concerns. We've heard from, I think, 3 of them so far, and that's, just very exclusive to those letters that went out to Black Diamond subdivision. So once we, clarify other changes, then we may get more responses. But I think if you were to do that, then I think the question becomes, if you wanted to notice between your first and your second meeting, we have 30 days. That may mean that you want to push out that second meeting in order to have more time for that notification to occur. But I'd also say that, like, this whole land use code update, it's not been done in isolation, right? We have, it's just become more concrete as to what those changes are going to be. So we've actually have AMX zoning and a use allowance table to share with them, and the map didn't come until June or May. So, they've had, we've done our best to make sure that they were daylighted about what changes were coming.
So how did
It's just
you
more concrete now.
communicate that with them?
We're,
Send the mail, or you just?
we're planning on doing that once we actually know that. I mean, I guess on the other side of it, we didn't want to send them out something and then have a use table that actually changed based off of conversations that we had with Planning Commission and City Council, and like, hey, now we got to pull that back. You don't need to worry about the letter I just sent you. So we're trying to find, and that's part of the difficulty in having these conversations now, and why it's unfortunate that they got this notice from somebody else, but the timing was intentional. I don't know if there's a perfect way to do it, but.
So is it your thought that the way you currently have it with the 90 days, so you're gonna let them know the decisions that have been made, and then there's the 90 days before it goes into effect, and if somebody has some unanticipated concern that we hadn't thought about in making this decision, that we could amend it before that 90 days was up? Is that sort of how you were thinking about it?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, if it doesn't, I mean, I think we've had some, so far a lot of the comments have been, don't change M1 zoning, and that's not what the comp plan says. So that's not something that, unless you guys give me different direction that we need a comp plan update, that's not where our effort's headed. But if it is something that's like, oh, that use definitely has, like, fits Lafayette, is something that council supports and even the comp plan supports in one way or another, or doesn't seem to have any impacts like to the neighborhood, then I think we could do it. But there are so many layers now to our code that it's a matter of where we do it. And I think that's the thing that I want to be able to daylight a little bit more to both you and Planning Commission, in terms of we have a use table, and also we have use-specific standards. And then we have like, well, is this going to be a special use review? We just have different opportunities. Like, and if something doesn't have a special use review now in M1 and would require it in AMX2, then that also gives us a tool, like if they come in through an expansion, that we can actually evaluate whether or not that use is, like, it just gives it a higher bar to do a review. So we want to fit that use, once we know what that is, to the right regulation, so that we either give it flexibility or we don't, right? And
As long as there's an
Yeah.
opportunity for the people you notice to come to us and say, this really messes up my whole life and here's why, whatever that might be. And we have an opportunity to make an amendment before it gets implemented, I'm okay with that. I just wanted to make sure that the public will get that notice. And then if they bring something to our attention that we missed, then
Yeah, so I guess I'd answer that the same way, like with that code amendment process, we'd have to evaluate what the extent of that code change is. Like, we're gonna be moving towards a first amendment to the code through that first ordinance, or second ordinance, I should say. But if this is something that just needs further evaluation and we come back, I mean, the code's not gonna be static. If we find that there's a flaw in it or something that you guys wanna change, we can do a code amendment. Like, a targeted one would be a fairly quick, 2 or 3 month process in order to get it fixed. And that's one of the concerns Planning Commission definitely had, was like, what if we don't get this right? And it's not in concrete, so.
Councilor Gianola?
Just on that kind of public notice issue, what is the legal required, time frame for public notice ahead of our kind of public hearings, and where does that public notice go?
Can I take the first stab at that? So first of all, with the discussion that was just happening, I was thinking about jumping in, and Councilor Gianola's question provided the perfect opportunity. Because you all are considering a land use code update and not a property-specific application, you're updating an entire section of our code or entire chapter of our code, as well as adopting a legislative rezoning map, or rezoning the entire city in conjunction with that new land use code. And so I just wanted to make a comment before I answer your question, Councilor Gianola, that in terms of legally required notice, that legally required notice is what is required for an ordinance. It's not property owner specific notices. What staff is referring to is that they are going to take an extra step that is beyond what is legally required here in terms of noticing that we have an ordinance coming before council. And in the case of a change to chapter 26, we also have a required public hearing that we don't normally have. You don't normally have public hearings with most ordinances that you consider that amend the code. If it's a change to our development and zoning code, you do have to have public hearings, both in front of Planning Commission, which have now happened, as well as council. And we have you scheduled for one public hearing. You can always add an additional public hearing. So that's the legally required notice. And to Councilor Gianola's question, our code for this type of code amendment and zoning map change would require a newspaper published notice. So it'll be published in a locally circulating newspaper at least 10 days prior to each public hearing. So in the case of Planning Commission, for example, they had their first public hearing, so that was noticed in the newspaper 10 days ahead of that hearing, as well as on the city website. I think the city's pretty good about advertising those hearings. And Planning Commission actually ordered a second public hearing when it had to continue its discussion on this item. And so we did publish a second newspaper notice of public hearing, and made sure that that second meeting gave us the full 10 days to publish that notice. So that's the legally required notice, is the newspaper public notice, which it is incumbent upon the public to check those notices. There's also, while not legally required, obviously there's been a great deal of community outreach and involvement and communication directly with developers who are paying attention, and property owners, as well as your community members who are watching this and looking at Lafayette Listens, et cetera. So yeah, so there's legally required notice, and then there's all the other things that the city is doing through this process to make sure that the community is aware of these changes.
Councilor Bowyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that from our city attorney. I guess I have questions that maybe we can dig into at a later date on how we're reaching all the people who aren't reading newspapers. So I wish our comms director, Aaron Fraser, was here to answer some of those questions, since, as we know, newspaper readership is virtually non-existent among younger people in Lafayette. My question is, in terms of the process for querying kind of specifics outside of the recommendations, I'm broadly in favor of everything PC put forward. Great job, Planning Commission. But the slide 27 in your deck, the final bullet was, are there other questions and topics the council would like to discuss? And to Councilor Jensen's point earlier, in the past couple of weeks, I have had a wide variety of meetings with members of the public and residents concerning the land use code, since a lot of folks are beginning to track it. I think there's some word of mouth, there's some local journalism, so people are beginning to ask very specific questions that I've had to get smart on. What process would be helpful to y'all, to you, Mayor, in terms of, because I have a list of things, but I don't want to just throw that at you, and I'm happy to hold until the discussion. But for that final bullet point, how would you prefer they be raised in terms of conveying what we've heard from the public?
You can do that tonight, if you want to do that tonight verbally to us, and if you want to communicate through Katie, or you want to, yeah, I mean, however you want to do it, but this bullet was just to give you an opportunity to give us that feedback tonight.
Absolutely. So. Would it be helpful to do that now, or just do?
Not now. Let's get through the other questions, and then we'll come back to that.
Sure.
Okay. Since it seems like we're there, I'm going to start as quickly as possible with the first one, which is, does anyone disagree with I believe it's December 15th, deferred effective date? I want to get to the other questions, but is anyone just completely opposed to this? I didn't hear anything, but it seems like we can move forward with that one. Okay, the joint session is the one I want to hit. I've heard from our Mayor Pro Tem that is something he would be in favor of. So I'm going to go to our Mayor Pro Tem, because there's two questions on this. First, you're in favor of, I have that. What is the timeline that you're most looking forward to? Is the recommended timeline to us, which would happen after first reading, the one you would go with?
Yes, and that's so we can see get an understanding of the entire package and ask questions before we meet with PC, so that we go in to that informed.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other counselor want to jump in on this one? So the questions are you in favor of a joint work session? I'll just go ahead and say yes, and also with the Mayor Pro Tem, I think the recommended one is the way I would go, which is after first reading, but I'm happy to listen to other counselors. Counselor Gianola.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the joint session. I guess before I can answer the second part of that, my question is, if we have a meeting with the Planning Commission between the first reading and the second reading, is there still an opportunity for us to make amendments to the land use code at that second hearing?
So the other thing I was trying to articulate through the recent memo was like, yeah, and I think you can pick it up like through the 11 conditions that we're able to act on tonight. Those are the kind of discrete changes that you can condition as, we approve this land use code ordinance with these specific changes. If you have something that requires more study or more evaluation, that's going to need to be in the, let's look at that, or explore this kind of change through your a code amendment through another ordinance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if we came and said, I think you need to change something very specific, some setback or whatever, that seems like it's an easy lift that could be done. Correct. By kind of line item in an amendment to a code. That could occur at the second reading, even if it didn't occur at the first reading.
Yes, it could. If it's discrete like that, and we could redline it, say at that second meeting, you could adopt an amendment to your ordinance on second reading of that nature.
Okay, perfect. In that case, I would be open to having the meeting with the Planning Commission in between the first reading and the second reading. That can work for me.
Great, thank you, Counselor. Counselor Bullion?
I'm happy to defer.
Either way works for me.
It's quick, just.
Sure. On the PC meeting, I'm open to being convinced. My druthers are probably to have the meeting before the first reading. Have we had a joint PC council meeting in the past year on the land use code? So it would kind of be the first, so I reckon there'd be some sorting out that might occur. So that's kind of why my bias leans towards beforehand, but I'm open to being persuaded.
Okay. Councilor Gallegos?
And I'm in favor of that additional meeting with Planning Commission, and I am okay with the timeline of doing it in between the first and second reading.
Great, thank you. Councilor Jensen, any thoughts here?
Same thing. I do, not having been through that process and knowing the personalities of some people on the Planning Commission who are very strong-willed, I would like to know how that works. You're going to be running the meeting. If Planning Commission and Council disagree, where do we go? How do we do it? Excuse me. I just need a little primer on that process and how it works, because I love the people on the Planning Commission, and I love that they're strong-willed, but they are strong-willed.
We can note that in the materials and probably open with that discussion too.
Well, I'm not saying I don't want them to be strong-willed. I do, but at some point, somebody makes a decision, right? And if we are divided up and some on council and Planning Commission, I mean, how does it work? You know what I mean?
Council, I would first start with the fact that it's a workshop, so you won't be making formal decisions. You'll definitely be working together on the issues that you're going to tackle at that workshop and discussing them and studying them, but ultimately the decision would be up to council to make at second reading if you do decide to move forward with something that you've discussed in that workshop. So it's not really about council versus Planning Commission making the decision. It's about council having that discussion with Planning Commission to get a better understanding of what their concerns or issues or recommendations were to help inform a decision that you'll make and to discuss that with them and then inform a decision that you as council will make on second reading to implement their recommendations or modifications that they've suggested. I hope that helps.
Good. Thank you. Councilor Gianola?
Thank you, Mayor. Just kind of on to maybe help address Council Bullier's question about why it could be favorable, because the sort of order of the situation right now to me is the Planning Commission has seen the code, they've approved recommendations to the code, and they've provided these conditions. At this point, we as a whole body have not really studied the code. Maybe some of us have. I've studied the code in depth, but having that show up in our packet and, we kind of go through the motion and the presentation with the staff to really understand and, consider the issues kind of gives us that opportunity, forces us to have the opportunity to really dig into the code, maybe for the first time for some of us. And then we can go into the discussion with Planning Commission being informed, right? I think that's a big advantage of doing it after that first reading.
I am with Councilor Gianola completely, except I draw the different conclusion from the same logic. Thank you.
Would you care to elaborate?
Just for the very reasons that you laid out, given PC's expertise and in-depth, and the fact that we've just heard an exceptional briefing from staff, then for me, and the logic in my head is, okay, next we would meet with PC to get their sense. Obviously, we know that they're having meetings that are going until midnight and later, so clearly there's been a great deal of digging into this. And so my logic is we'll sit with them, meet with them, hear from them. That'll affect our thinking, and then we'll come back, provide feedback, then first reading, adaptation, et cetera, second reading. That's just kind of where I'm approaching this. But
yeah, I understand. And for me personally, it's such a complex amount of information that going into that meeting cold would be difficult. And I think having been required to study it ahead of time would be really beneficial for council.
Great, thank you. I'm hearing the majority of council is in favor of the joint session, and it sounds like the current recommended timeline between the first and second reading is the one we'd go with. Okay, moving on to the next question, which is council supporting the Planning Commission recommended code changes. Is there anyone who wants to jump on this one? Councilor Jensen?
Can we do them in order, just one at a
Sure.
time? Okay, with regard to public land dedication, I do not, we have a whole inclusion, diversity, equity, and access plan. And we have something in our current code which allows private entities to create recreation facilities that would not be open to everyone. And that feels like it's inconsistent with the rest of who we are. And I don't want to support that even at a reduced level. I don't understand why we would ever give a public land dedication to an entity who is creating facilities, recreational or open space or parkland that is not open to the whole community, swimming pool, whatever it might be. So I don't want to have a private public land dedication piece. I'd like to eliminate that piece altogether and just, if you meet this in the ways and get rid of the private part of that. And I would love to hear what others have to say about that.
Agree strongly.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. This is part of, I think, what I'd like to hear. This is what we're looking at. PC has seen this. And I think once this is in context for the presentation, I would like to understand what their thinking was on, I mean, it's a reduction. So I want to know why they wouldn't fully recommend eliminating it.
Well, they're leaving it up to us to decide. And I actually had a meeting with staff yesterday, and I asked about the history of this. And remember, our code is 40 years old, and at the time, we didn't have the budget to build facilities everywhere, and, a neighborhood park might, that might be exclusive to the neighborhood was at least a park, that we, and I don't think we're in that same kind of position that we were in, 40 years ago, where we need to have exclusive kinds of activities or assets in our community. So I think the circumstances 40 years ago were very different. And so I don't think right now we're worrying about not having parks at all, which 40 years ago I think we were. So at least they would get built, something would get built. Now we're not there. We have parks, and we shouldn't be building any sort of exclusive facilities that are not open to, and I mean, if we're gonna have an IDEA plan and we're not gonna follow it, we should get rid of it.
Okay, if I may, I might have to ask our city attorney. At the Medtronic, when we talked about their public land dedication, their use was, it looked like it was going to only serve their staff, and that's a private facility. And we asked for, if I understand correctly, we asked for them to, I think we actually denied that use of their public land dedication. So what we're talking about here, is that the reason why that came forward to us, is that their public land dedication would be to build a recreational area at their facility that wasn't available to the public?
That's correct. So they did request under our current code credit towards private recreation facilities that they were providing on the Medtronic campus. That did go, I know at the time that the planning director and the city manager forwarded that to LoSAB for a recommendation, and that recommendation was forwarded to council. And I Actually don't recall if council didn't give them any credit for the private recreation facilities towards their public land dedication, but they did. Does staff recall?
They did not. No.
Okay.
It was largely indoors. They were justifying a small outdoor yoga pad that would have been the available to the public, but it was behind the building.
Right, and it wouldn't have been
area that
available to
wasn't
the
very
public.
accessible.
That's right. Okay, so it sounds like staff can confirm that council ultimately decided not to provide a credit. They did still meet their full public land dedication, I think maybe through a combination of land and cash in lieu, instead of having private or credit for the private facilities.
Right. I just want a clarification because looking at that, I do think that we can, I'm not sure why we would continue to support this in our code. So unless anyone else on council sees a good reason to continue to support it.
I'm just, for my own benefit, and forgive me, we heard from the chair of LoSAB that LoSAB supports this. Why is LoSAB wrong?
I don't know. I don't know why LoSAB is wrong, but that's something we could ask for feedback on.
I'm not sure I agree with that interpretation of LoSAB's recommendation. I believe the recommendation from LoSAB was make this reduction for private facilities 0. Don't allow it.
Thought that, Councilor Giuliano, I thought the LoSAB wrote, we fully support all 4 parts of the Planning Commission recommendations having to do with public land dedications.
Yeah, and I think maybe that it was give the city council the ability to make the determination what the amount is. In hearing from the chair of LoSAB at the Planning Commission meetings, my recollection was that LoSAB thought this should be eliminated.
Okay. Okay.
I'm hearing support for it being eliminated, I believe. I'll ask staff because I want to know what's best for you in this context. I also don't want to get into legislating everything tonight because that's not the point of tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say, this could also be something that you guys discuss at your first reading, and that way it has the opportunity for members of LoSAB to come forward if we want to reach out to them to clarify any sort of comments. So maybe not necessarily walk one by one and see what particular edits you want to have, because you will be able, we are saying 1 through 11, we can make pretty quick edits between first and second or beforehand. So I think it was generally 1 through 11. Are we generally supportive with having those conversations? And then the big question tonight really was that joint meeting. So however you want to proceed, we're happy to go line by line, but also recognize that could repeat on August 18th or when
I thought
first
line by
reading is.
line may be helpful, but I'm starting to notice that we're going to get into the weeds in this, and maybe that is for a council meeting where we can actually look at everything and we have the code in front of us. In terms of direction, what is beneficial for you at this moment on this particular issue? So looking at the recommendations.
Maybe instead of line by line, if you go through it and just like highlight anything that you have concerns about, like if you can, things that we can actually check off our list, like, so the moratorium, if there is support for that, that changes how we dig into data centers and advanced air mobility hubs. And the thing that I guess I want to be clear about too is we haven't made any code changes since June 24th. So we treated this as we treat most applications, where once it is ready for Planning Commission and City Council, we need comment and direction from both of you before we go back and make any changes. And that's been, I think, confusing for everybody because this has been such a fluid document. So we get comments from people and we automatically make changes even to like a typo, right? And now the typos are still there. It hasn't got any changes. So we were hoping to bring you a cleaner version. So if there's a possibility for any of these things to, the easy ones, if you can identify, but if there's not, then we can have all of this discussion on that first meeting too. And like Katie said, Planning Commission did a great job getting these conditions to a point where they're pretty discreet, they're very specific in terms of what the change is. There are these little nuances where it's like, is there a percentage reduction or an elimination that council wants that you can certainly have at that first meeting in August, so.
Okay, what I'll come back to council with is, I'm going to ask you all in a second if there's any of these that you want removed entirely or something that, big picture, we just don't want to move forward with. However, there was one that was already on the table, so I'm going to turn to Councilor Gianola here because it's where I heard it, which was the moratoriums for data centers and advanced air mobility, but then also the definitions being added. Did you still feel there was a conflict there? Are you okay with having both recommendations?
I understand it. I appreciate the staff's response. They clarified it very nicely for me. I'm in support of both of those recommendations.
Great, thank you.
I had one that I had raised. I'm in general very supportive of all of these, but I would like to have the mobile home language say that mobile home zoning or affordable housing, so that we could convert really old mobile homes into affordable housing if we wanted to. Because in some way, they already are affordable housing, but they would be sort of deed restricted, permanent affordable housing. That could be not required, just an optional use under mobile home zoning.
I'm very supportive of that, but I'm curious how it would work given the ownership structures of different mobile home communities.
Well, it won't be easy and be very hard. The way the city of Boulder did it is they bought the park. They bought the land that the park is on. Then if people still own mobile homes, they're doing it very slowly, one unit at a time. And some of them don't want to transfer. They don't want to build a home. They're going to stay in the mobile home until they die. And it starts to get really complicated, and I don't think we should address any of that. It just make it an option. And then if it should happen, there's a myriad of ways it could happen, Kyle. And I don't think we should address any of that in here. Just make it an optional use.
And so that, Councilor Jensen, that might unlock a building type, like a duplex or something like that, or a single unit detached home, but only if it was deed restricted, permanently affordable.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing.
I like that.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to put it in context, this did actually come up long ago when we were looking at bringing this zoning into existence to somehow make an exception. And like you said, it's not perfectly clear what that looks like in every case, but it was former Mayor Pro Tem Walton who said, how can we possibly allow for that possibility? So thank you for bringing that up. I had forgotten that was one of the concerns then, and obviously it's still a concern now, is we don't want to tie people to, if they have the capacity to move forward with that, and it's in the zoning, if we can make an exception, then let's provide for that.
Okay, great. Broadly, is there support for the Planning Commission recommendations? I want to turn back to Councilor Bullier in a second, because I know there's a couple other topics, but just from council, is there anything that we feel needs to be discussed? Okay, not saying anything. Good on that. All right, for the final question, Councilor Bullier, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few quick items, and I'm sure I'll have more as we go forward in coming weeks. But the first and foremost is I've heard from a number of pastors in our community concerning the northwest parcel at 287 and South Boulder Road, which is currently zoned R2, and I believe in the revised code would be rezoned as Amex-2. And the concern is essentially that would push out the community's churches over time. So I'm wondering, and I understand the alignment with the broader efforts underway in South Boulder. I'm on board with that. But I am concerned by that rezoning, considering it's, I believe, 4 churches on that parcel. And so I'm wondering if y'all can share some of the logic with the rezoning and then help me understand how we would want to keep these faith communities in our community if they're so radically rezoned.
I'm gonna let Phil look at the land use code table and tell us whether or not churches are still allowed there. I would assume that they are, but I'll start with where we're headed with that is that was a comp plan designation. So it says adaptable commercial use, I believe there. We've looked at it and we're wondering whether or not that was heavy-handed in the sense that neighborhood commercial may be more appropriate because all of that access comes from residential neighborhoods to the west. So that's something we could look at more, but it's not following the comp plan. So we were trying to keep our parameters pretty limited. So let's do those things as cleanup items afterwards, and we can have more specific discussions of them.
Yeah, in the draft code, those, a church use is allowed through a special use review. So I think in that case, if they were to expand, they would
Yeah.
just go through a special use review. I would say with the area plan, that is within the area plan boundaries. So that's one of the property owners that would be connecting with as well. Because that site is pretty unique in that a special review may be warranted because of the access through the neighborhood and the limited access to the highway and so forth. So, yeah, that's where it stands right now.
Thank you. And can you help me understand why a church would need a special use review?
So parking and traffic are the two major impacts. And if you've been on South Public on a Sunday morning,
Oh, yeah.
you understand what I'm talking about. So, and especially that has South Public, right? That's actually a pretty major street. But if these uses are actually accessed by local roads and residential neighborhoods, that impact that use category and the special use reviews, I think appropriate for what we're doing. But if we wanted to tone down, if we were to change it from a AMX2 to neighborhood commercial, it would be an analysis of like, how much pressure are you putting on that to redevelop into something else based
Yeah.
off of the allowance for,
I'm sorry, Jeff,
More
by the
commercial,
logic,
yeah.
since they're currently churches
Yeah.
and people are currently parking there, I'm struggling on this.
it would be an expansion, right? Like whether or not they went from whatever size they are right now to twice or three times the size and became more of a mega church that had
That I'm on board with.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So-
I'm a non-believer, but I believe in this. I have First Amendment concerns with this, but we'll grapple with that another time. Specifically on the expansion, I've heard from a few small businesses in the community who currently have parcels, Baseline and Carr, that have owned their parcel for a significant period of time, decades, and they would be interested in expanding in the not distant future under the current operational footprint, and have expressed concerns with the perception of being rezoned out from underneath their feet. And so again, the question I've kind of has been raised to me and maybe some other counselors is Lafayette trying to zone me out of being part of this community? I know we don't believe that, we don't want to do that, but if I operate a business and I've been operating that business and paying taxes and employing people for a number of decades, and then I'm told I need a review to expand my business on property I already own within reason, right? We're not talking about putting a glue factory in the middle of town. I feel empathy for that concern, and I know that a special use review is a significant burden on staff, on council, and the team. So I'm wondering, are there possibilities for us to grandfather? I know that term means different things to different people in different contexts, but are there opportunities for us to grandfather businesses that are already part of our community to allow them to expand their footprint where they already are without causing undue burden?
I think it depends. We need a little bit more context. If it's a non-conforming use,
But it's currently conforming.
if it's currently conforming and becomes a non-conforming use in our new code, then I don't know what our legal tolerance for, like, if we're trying to do something, we need to commit to doing it.
Yeah.
And if we're not trying to do something, we need to figure out what and that's where I was saying earlier that like, this is the part of that conversation where we need to understand what those uses are, what those potential expansions may be, and whether or not they're something we need to regulate, to control or to regulate to allow. And so that's part of that. I'd be curious to understand, especially off of, you said Baseline?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I don't know, that isn't changing significantly. Like, we have a B zone district now, and the comp plan tells us that, and I think everybody agrees that downtown and OTX covers Baseline. So the comp plan didn't suggest that B1 should be kept on Baseline. I don't know that, I wasn't here for that conversation, right? So OTX, and the OTX actually exists on the other side of Baseline in terms of, or not OTX, but Old Town exists on the other side of Baseline, but it's residential in nature. So I think it makes sense. This is a long way of saying that, like, I don't know what the changes are that would make this use necessarily non-conforming. The one I guess I could think of offhand is maybe an automotive repair type of business, not being allowed in Old Town zoning, but maybe being more commercial in nature for a B1 zone district. But I'd be curious to learn more and be able to give you
I'm
more
happy
context.
to take this offline. I
Okay.
don't
Yep.
need you to solve it in
Yeah.
this given moment. I guess I want to put on the table for everyone's consideration. I strongly support the comp plan and where we're trying to take the city and the community and agree with the strategic vision. And I find it anathema to pull the rug out from under established members of the community, whether business, residential, or church. And so I want to find a way to legally square that circle. I don't know how to do that, and I'm not trying to make you solve that in this moment, but that's something that has been kind of consistent feedback that I've heard in the past couple weeks.
So I have an idea.
May I finish my point real quick? Thank you. And then the final thing, and then I'll turn to Councilor Jensen to say it smarter than I can, is just it's come up a bit, the need to have neighborhood meetings and dialogue and so forth. And I strongly support that in everything we do through the code and the process. I'm also empathetic to the argument that public engagement and input can be weaponized to slow down development, engagement, innovation, creativity. And so I want to note that both the need to fully engage the public at all steps of the process, to include the land use code working group as soon as possible, and not letting those processes kind of throw sand in the gears, I think is really important. There's a journalist, a woman named Jerusalem Dempsis, who's done extraordinary work on this, kind of like the weaponization of public engagement. Obviously, Ezra Klein, problematic though he is, has written a lot about that. So I think both those ideas are very important to keep front and center. And I'll stop there and turn to Councilor Jensen.
So I've been thinking about this question of businesses that get zoned out. And I know one of the consultants who was hired by Tebow made a recommendation to change the zoning to allow more industrial, well, some of the places where we're trying to get more retail to try to keep the industrial component. But to our planning director's point, if we're wanting to shift away from industrial near neighborhoods and make it more retail and friendly for walking and so on, we gotta do that. But, so I don't think their suggested change, it also flies in the face of this whole working group that's been looking at this, and they didn't recommend it, so I don't wanna override them. But perhaps there's a time period that we could say somebody who gets zoned out of, into being non-conforming use has 6 months or a year, if they're gonna expand, that they could expand under their current zoning. That doesn't help them forever, you know, and if their plan was to expand in 5 or 10 years, it's not gonna help them. But it does create an exception to somebody for whom this was like really catching them off guard, and they had, you know, imminent plans to do something, and we have stopped that. So anyway, that was my idea, which was that we think about what is a good time frame, and we allow an extension without special use review for up to a year, is my thinking.
Thank you, Councilor Jensen. I just want to respond briefly to that. I buy your logic. I do have a lot of concerns with that, because requiring a small business to expand in 6 months to a year is a non-starter for most of the small businesses in our community, particularly with the cost of labor and materials right now. Plus, as we all know, we're not the fastest community in the world to get permits and approvals. So that would, I think, be setting our small businesses and ourselves up to fail. And again, I just want to hammer home the point. These businesses that we're talking about, churches, residences, et cetera, that we're talking about rezoning, are currently fundamental parts of the fabric of our community. And I just have sort of like constitutional objections to saying, hey, F you, we have a strategic vision and you're not part of it. I just think that's not who we are. And I think that the long-term vision of the comp plan can be satisfied while also safeguarding who's currently here contributing to our community.
Well, the two businesses I talked to wanted to expand. They didn't tell me exactly when, but I got the feeling it was more current than it was long-term, but maybe I'm wrong. And I hear what you're saying, though, about, I mean, especially this council, you know, as part of our retreat, said small business and protecting small business was an important part of who we wanted to be. It was one of our values. And I also don't know that there is a way to reconcile that we're changing the way we want to use our available land with the fact that some people currently using that land are not what the comp plan says is the kind of uses that we want in that location. And I don't think they're reconcilable, but by a case-by-case basis, which is what the special use review allows, right? So if they are a church and they want to expand, they can expand if we approve it by special use review, right? Or a business that wants to expand. So the 1 year we're giving them is just a little bit of a grace period because we're changing the land use designation. And if they want to expand beyond that 1 year, then they would have to have special use review. And I would think in a lot of those cases, especially, I mean, if we're talking about a imposing industrial kind of factory or something right next to a neighborhood, we're probably going to say no. But if it's something more modest and it doesn't impact the neighborhood in any sort of negative way, and especially if it's a church, you know, I would think we'd be likely to approve it. But, you know, those circumstances are all unique.
Yeah, I think a
I wanna
couple
give staff
things.
the
Yeah,
opportunity
we
to
hear
jump
the
in.
intent, so why don't we get our heads together and we can propose some discussion at first reading. I think also a reminder of what we said early on is if we continue to see a certain area that continues to have special use review come to you over and over again, right? This isn't a static document. You know, we do want to be able to make those changes. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities, but instead of hashing out tonight, maybe we can come with a few different proposals if that's okay with you at first reading.
I think that's perfect. Anything else, Councilor Bowler?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Great. Any other topics or questions from council at this time? Councilor Gallegos?
So I've heard a lot of community opposition to OTX3, so I just wanted to make sure a discussion of OTX3 will be included in our co-meeting with Planning Commission.
I believe that will come back in the joint session, yeah. Great, seeing nothing else, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you, guys.
And moving into our last update tonight. And if you're all set, I will turn it over to you, Assistant to the City
Thank you.
Manager, Alex Nelson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here with a brief presentation regarding 2 potential board and commission updates for Council's consideration. So the objective of tonight's agenda item is to really seek feedback on those 2 items. The first is updating the Human Rights Board name and scope. And then the second is adjusting the Planning Commission recruitment cadence. So these are 2 kind of distinct or separate items, so I'll walk through each one individually, pause for questions, and then wrap up with next steps and discussion and direction from City Council. So we'll begin with the Human Rights Board scope. So by way of background, as many councilors are likely aware, the Human Rights Board was established in 2016. And the scope is outlined in the code. The scope that currently stands is outlined in the code, and it's really focused around 4 key areas. First is studying and creating a list of priorities related to legislation for City Council to consider. The second is assessing impacts of proposals specifically related to diversity, equity, and inclusion as requested by City Council. Third is facilitating conversations with community members about various issues and actually issuing recommendations to departments within the city for resolution. And the final is making recommendations regarding federal, state, and local legislation. These are kind of summaries of more robust language within the code, but intended to highlight the 4 key areas currently in the code language. We have heard from a number of board members that this scope is challenging to implement for an advisory board within our city's advisory board structure. It's fairly ambiguous, includes a number of non-advisory board functions. And as you all know, our advisory boards are bound by a number of constraints, including the Open Meetings Law, our advisory board structure, wherein these boards are responsible to and appointed by the City Council. So they advise City Council, who directs the city manager to then direct staff and implement matters. And then finally, our advisory boards are really limited in terms of resources. They don't have many much budget dedicated to them or dedicated staff resources outside of the limited role of a staff liaison, which is really responsible for ensuring compliance, posting agendas, drafting minutes, things like that. So we've heard from a number of members kind of an expanded desire to conduct a number of non-advisory board activities as well, such as hosting events, conducting advocacy efforts, fundraising for items, et cetera, that don't, again, really fit in that advisory board structure. So because of this, the challenges with this scope, we've had, for a number of years, high turnover on the HRB and heard some discussions, or feedback from members about some frustration with the board and its ability to feel effective and productive as a board. So this is not a new challenge. We identified this, actually the Human Rights Board identified this challenge when they came to City Council to request funding to draft the IDEA, or Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Strategic Plan. And as part of that scope that received support from City Council was to assess the scope of the Human Rights Board. So last year, through that plan drafting process, we met with the Human Rights Board a number of times. The first was in March of last year and held a dedicated focus group with the HRB to talk about the plan as well as their scope. We then had 2 follow-up sessions in May and July of last year to conduct and discuss a SWOC, or Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Constraints analysis based on the board itself and their scope as it stood. We used that feedback as well as some additional research to draft an initial scope that we took to the HRB at the time in 2025. Got feedback, continued to refine it, and most recently went back for a full discussion on April 2026 to get additional feedback on that scope, as well as discuss the name of the board, because we heard some feedback that the name didn't really align with the intent of that advisory board. And then finally discussed with HRB, and most recently the meeting last week, and kind of got a final thumbs up. They made a motion to approve the recommendation to advance the change in scope and name that we'll touch on in a moment for you all tonight. I do want to note that at that meeting last week, we also had a separate discussion, or separate but related discussion about the actual structure of the board. Kind of took a step back and asked a question instead of how do we take an existing scope and make it fit what we need. Really asked the question of, is this advisory board the best structure to advance the IDEA principles within Lafayette? Had a really rich discussion, and ultimately the outcome in terms of the recommendation was for the advisory board to maintain their advisory board structure, but we did talk about some other alternative options, such as creating kind of a separate 501c3 or community group that would allow the HRB to conduct some of those activities that they expressed interest in without being bound by the advisory board kind of limitations that I just mentioned. So the product of those discussions was this draft scope that was outlined in your packet, and I'll just kind of walk through here on the screen with you all. You'll see here the first change would be updating the name of the HRB to the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Board that would align with our IDEA strategic plan. And then that board would advise City Council on 3 key areas. The first would be city policies that promote IDEA for Lafayette residents. The second would be city initiatives and activities intended to improve IDEA across our municipal services and programs. And the third would be community outreach practices, and specifically providing feedback on efforts to remove participation barriers and improve engagement with our city decision-making. That's kind of the summary of that piece. I'll pause here for questions, and then we'll do next steps towards the end.
Great, thank you. Questions about these proposed changes for what is currently HRB? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is going to go straight to the city attorney. So the question is, if we, and I couldn't agree more that there are amazing challenges with the history of this board as it's been reformed, and I know they lift heavier loads than sometimes we do on council because of the depth they dig into, and I really appreciate this effort. But so let's say that they get information from the 501c3 not-for-profit activities that they carry out. How does that get to us without taking into account open meetings laws, like the specifics that are discovered? How do we get that robust information here if they were done outside of the city board scope?
Yeah, are you asking if they were to use a different structure outside of our advisory board? That would be likely through a number of avenues, any sort of communication with city council. They could certainly come to the public input and provide input in writing. But to clarify, the discussion with the HRB last week kind of landed on not changing the structure, and so maintaining that advisory board piece.
So then we go back to some of the issues that they face when they want to discuss things, then they are bound by open meetings. And they're hot topics. So how does that improve that situation?
How does changing the scope improve the situation? Changing the scope really helps give them a bit more direction, and because we've heard from a number of members the feeling like there was a lack of direction or a lack of understanding of what the board is being tasked to do by the city council. So at least the intent was to make the scope language, if we're going to maintain this advisory board and this advisory board structure, update the scope language so that it is a little bit more implementable, if that's a word, within our advisory board limitations, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. I think we can move on to Planning Commission.
Okay. Moving on to the Planning Commission recruitment. So as you are aware, in 2024, the city transitioned to a semi-annual recruitment process. Previous to this, we were doing kind of ad hoc recruitment as needed to fill vacancies on all of our city boards and commissions. The intent of this transition was to coordinate our recruitment activities, really the engagement, the communications, the open house that we hold now, aligning our work plan process with the city council cycle. So that would be the election, retreat, work plan setting, all of that. And then syncing all of the terms for our board and commission members. We were in a position where almost every board member had a different term, and that made the administration of the boards really challenging. So this offered a great opportunity to sync all of those up. To summarize that cadence, we really do the primary recruitment activities between August and November, with that includes soliciting applications, the board's conducting interviews, reviewing the applications, making recommendations to city council, all for terms to begin December 1st. Then as it currently stands, January, those boards hold work planning discussions, and then that's fed into our city council retreat on a year that we hold one, or provided in an update to city council. However, we have heard a couple times this year requests to explore adjusting at least the planning commission recruitment cadence to fall after the city council election, because for really two reasons. One, if someone ran for city council, was not elected, but is interested in serving on the planning commission, currently they would have to either run for council and apply, and then kind of weigh things out and see how the chips may fall. The alternative would be someone currently sitting on city council who wants to then apply to serve on the planning commission. This would, again, separating them out would just create some clarity between those two processes and cadences. So the potential adjustment based on that council request and feedback is what I'll walk through, but for some context, just to summarize the city council process, just putting it all in one slide, as you all are well aware. The candidacy and campaign process really occurs between August and October. The election in November, results are certified late November, and then our councilors are sworn in that first meeting in December. So if we were to switch the planning commission recruitment process to occur outside of the city council election window, what we would suggest is opening that recruitment process the first week of December, and having it open most of the month of December, and then at that time also determining the city council review committee, which is required by our charter, and then conducting the review of the applications early to mid-January, and then making those recommended appointments for terms effective February 1st. So it's really pushing out our current process 2 months to begin after the city council election and the new councilors are sworn in.
Questions on this one? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm wondering why is this needed? And how is this different from the other? Because there could be people who are looking at one of the other boards and commissions versus council. So are we gonna end up doing this for the other boards and commissions? Just to be clear, what was the rationale for this only PC doing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. The rationale was this was kind of the direct request from City Council, was to look at the Planning Commission specifically, but we do know that there have been in the past members who ran for city council and then were ultimately appointed to other advisory boards. So this would be a city council decision, but just trying to be responsive to that request.
So this could happen for the other boards and commissions as well? Okay.
Could I follow up on that? If you're wanting to be consistent with timeframes, which is why we changed to this process, could you just move everything 2 months? And so that if somebody who ran for council and also wanted to be on the SRAB or the LoSAB or whatever it might be, would also be able to do that? And then when you'd have, just like we have now, but it would be 2 months later, so that everything is coordinated?
Yeah, we can certainly do whatever you guys are open to. What I would suggest maybe if we do in that process, just given the holidays with December and if we're looking to a broader scope of trying to do recruitment, right now we have a spring recruitment process that is technically the off cycle, and then this fall one, I would flip them and just make the spring one, which, remind me Alex, the dates, be your primary.
Yeah, opens in March.
And the fall be your kind of, right? So that we're not then moving that up a month and getting into the holiday season. So you start recruitment in January after all the holidays have settled. Interviews for the entire, because all of the boards will now have to do the interviews ahead of time to recommend to council. So really open. Again, this was kind of coming from council after, I think, one of the new ideas. So we just want to be responsive given we are now getting close to that major recruitment.
And I might just add, if we were to change this for everybody, the initial rationale for our current process was to have the board seated and the work plan discussions occur before any city council retreat, which typically takes place in February. So this might just flip that. And if council's okay kind of having the priority setting discussion and then using that to determine the board and commission work plans, that's certainly up to you all, but that would kind of effectively change how we currently manage that process.
Councilor Bullard?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Nelson. I'm certainly open to moving all the boards and commissions, so it's all at once, but strongly agree with our city manager's point on not crushing the holidays under a lot of paperwork. Also, people make New Year's resolutions to volunteer more, so catch them early in the new year. So that's certainly something I'm interested in. As a hypothetical, if a planning commissioner were to resign next week, and I were to resign from council tomorrow, could I apply to that planning commissioner opening?
Yes.
Okay, a planning commissioner resigns today. I resign. Can I apply for that planning commissioner vacancy? Can I switch hats? Assuming that I was selected as a hypothetical.
Under our current code, there is no restriction on applying. You cannot hold both offices at once, however.
Right. Okay, thank you. I don't like that. I think there should be a cooling off period after serving on council. I'm agnostic as what it is, 6 months, a year. But given the unique hat of a councilor and the unique hat of a planning commissioner, I think going from council to planning commission is not ideal for the community. We have 31,000 billion people. So I particularly, I would love to explore if we can add a cooling off period specific to PC, not to the others, because PC is special. And I'm curious what other folks have to say about that.
I think this has become a bigger discussion on just boards and commissions as a whole. I would ask staff what would be most beneficial at this moment. Should I try to reel it in and talk about planning commission, or do we think this is best brought back for a larger discussion on boards and commissions? Because we just changed our boards and commissions, which is the other part, and I understand that. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. And I was trying to minimize how many times we make changes, so that's why I initiated this conversation. It has become a bigger discussion. I'm okay with not having a bigger discussion right now. I just wanted to get some understanding of that this may add more work than we would. I don't want to add more work, but it may lead to it, but that might be important. And maybe that, and I don't think tonight is the night to add a can of worms or open the avenue for more discussion or more work down the line. So I don't think tonight is the time to have a discussion, and I'm okay with this potential adjustment for now.
City Manager.
What I will say is this year's not an election year, so if we are basing kind of that rationale of the council candidates running and, not knowing and changing the date because of that, that would be a good change for next year. What Councilor Bollier is potentially citing is resignations that are kind of more of the unknown. So I don't know that that helps you, but if we want a cooling off period, that is more for the immediate discussion versus changing the timing necessarily based upon elections wouldn't impact you much this year. You could always implement that piece next year. Not to throw even more into it, but.
Councilor Jensen.
Thank you. I would like to understand why you think a cooling off period is warranted, and I want to also just note that council doesn't have to accept somebody on the planning commission. We approve those positions, so if we thought a person needed a cooling off period for some reason, we could sort of enforce that by not choosing them at that moment, but I'd like to hear why you think it would be helpful.
I think given the unique role of Planning Commission and its relationship with council, because your fellow councilor is a colleague, switching the hats in what could be a very quick time frame could be perceived by the public as problematic.
Cronyism, sort of.
It could be perceived that way.
Sure. Okay. I hear that.
Councilor Gianello.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I am in favor of the proposal that has been presented to us tonight. And with respect to the cooling off period, a question I will raise is, would this require a charter amendment?
I would like to look into that. Our charter does address planning commissioner qualifications and composition, unlike our other boards and commissions. So I'd like an opportunity to look into that, and I can let council know.
Yeah, I think it might. The answer is it might. And so I think having the city attorney doing that evaluation, if we are considering something like that, is a good idea.
Great. I'm hearing councilors at least want to look into this. So can we have staff look at that, both the charter and just everything in general for Planning Commission, come back to us at some point with how we can move forward on a potential cooling off period? But now that we're here and we're talking about this, I would love to hear thoughts on the questions at hand, which are the Human Rights Board and the current proposals for the Planning Commission. We can start with the Human Rights Board. Currently, the Human Rights Board, possibly not soon, but what's in front of us. And I'd love to start with Councilor Jensen, being that she is the current liaison to that board.
As Mr. Nelson's, it was a robust discussion, and they are good and smart folks, and this is what they have decided they want for themselves, and I respect that. They've looked at all kinds of other ways to do business other than the format they're currently in. They also had some ideas about things under that new scope that they could be doing right now. And so I feel like there was not a, oh my gosh, with this new scope, what are we going to do with ourselves? Which I think is sort of what has happened to other versions of this board, is they haven't really known what they could be working on. But I think they had thoughts and ideas about ways to take that IDEA plan and weave it better into the work of the city. Kind of like when we talked tonight about, public land dedication, that process was established way before we had an IDEA kind of a plan, and we hadn't talked about that. And so they want to look at all the city functions and sort of figure out how we better incorporate those kind of principles into the work of the city, which I think could be a good lot of work for them for a while. And so they are not going to be worried about what should they do. And I think they're going to focus on that. And, they do have an event coming up in October called, it's not a screening, but excerpting of a film called The Librarians, which is all about, free speech and access to materials and how that works in our society, which I think is going to be really exciting. So I don't think they are, I'm all for this. It feels like the right thing to do based on the people who've been dedicated to this, wanting it to happen.
Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts from council on this? I'm happy to go next. Councilor Bullock.
Just that I'm thrilled that we have two HRB members in the room, so thank y'all for being here. I know the folks who comprise this board are extremely dedicated, have chosen excellent spouses. I guess I'm thrilled to support this. I don't see any reason why not to. I'm excited to roll out the artist that's not DEIA, IDEA board. So yeah, absolutely.
I'll go next, actually, because I shortly, for a short amount of time, served on HRB and then became liaison to HRB. And I love this board, and I understand just how much they can do, but I understand that for a very long time, that scope was very, very broad, which created a problem. So I love this, and I love that we're moving forward. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to say that this is part of the evolution. Oh, not supposed to say evolution. This is part of the progression of the lifting all voices in the city. And we had to do some work with the Waste Reduction Advisory Committee. We had to do work with LESAC. I'm not going to try to remember that whole acronym. The Older Adults Advisory Board. And, it hurt my heart to see HRB struggling. And the amazing amount of work that they did and what they had to deal with when we were discussing Mary Miller's history here. It's something I think they deserve the respect to be able to determine how they should be organized. So I'm well in favor of this, and if there are any things that they struggle with moving forward, that we should continue to be there for them to make it possible for them to act with the assurity that council is in support of the work that they're doing. So I'm proud to see that they have done the work to make this change, to figure out what will empower them forward. And I just want to make sure that council understands that this is one of the spectacular boards that has a future. They just had to let us know what they need to do.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other councilor want to jump in on this? Great. It seems like we have most of council for this one. Planning Commission recruitment. Any thoughts? Councilor Jensen?
I don't think we should make a decision tonight,
Go.
since we don't need to. And since this question, I think I'd like to give staff a little time to think about if we did change the dates for all of them 2 months later, how might that impact the workload and whether there's, any conflicts or anything. And then we would come back and look at this once we have that information from staff. To me, it seems logical that it would be easier if we didn't have Planning Commission have a separate process from everybody else. But if that's not true, and you would rather just have Planning Commission do this, but I do think the reason this was brought to our attention is what we saw last election cycle with a council member wanting to be on the Planning Commission and just the awkwardness that created. And any board or commission could have that happen, and so I think it would be prudent to plan for that happening in the future with another board or commission, and that if we can and it doesn't disrupt things too much, we should probably keep everything together. But I want to make sure staff feels like it is not too much of an intrusion on their workload the way it's being suggested.
Right. Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm just going to echo what Councilor Jensen said to finally put this one to sleep. Like, we got a structure that works and everybody's happy with it. So I'm interested in hearing what city staff say to finally settle us.
Councilor Gianella?
I'll be the odd man out and say I disagree. I think Planning Commission is different. It's already different. We've already had a separate recruitment for Planning Commission during the year 2026. due to vacancy, but we don't fill vacancies on other boards and commissions like we fill on planning commission. So I am personally comfortable with the proposal to shift the recruitment cycle for planning commission separate from all the other boards and commissions. I think it's a good idea. I think the timing is better aligned with just some of the options and abilities, and certainly my desire to see the incoming city councilors have the input on who their planning commission is going to be for while they're on the city council. I think there's a lot of good reasons to do this, and I think to do it separate from the rest of the boards and commission is okay.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Bollier?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll agree with Councilor Gianola in terms of feeling comfortable making the recommended or potential decision or recommendation to shift the time frame. I'm happy to revisit the cooling off period once the city attorney has had time to look at it. I did want to just flag, so I'm lucky to serve as the council liaison for the Older Adults Advisory Board, Public Art Committee, and LCAB. And I have heard from representatives from each of those groups that filling vacancies in the middle of the year is a challenge. They've grappled with vacancies on each of those boards in the past 7 months that I've been liaison. So I do want to just note that is a challenge for the boards because of the new process, as has been explained to me. So we don't need to sort that tonight, but I did want to convey that concern and challenge. One potential suggestion I heard was like, hey, we had all these applicants, we selected this person, 3 months later, someone moved out of state. Can we just grab someone from that hat? We already interviewed them and we liked them. We would be happy to go with them. That's not how our process currently works. So I just want to flag that's a concern that they have shared. But yeah, I agree with Councilor Gianola in terms of the PC recommendation. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Councilor Gallegos, thoughts on this?
So I'm thinking that staff worked hard to simplify the recruiting process. And why are we going to change it to add another separate process? So I don't see the need to move forward with this. I like the current process. But if a change to the calendar is what's needed, that's fine with me.
Could you explain what you meant by that? Are you meaning everybody changes or just the planning commission changes when you say it changed?
So I don't see the need to change just planning commission. I think it should be on the same timeline as all of the other boards and commissions.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Sorry, Mayor, I had a point of clarification, and because Councilor Bollier is on three different boards, changing in the middle of the year, if that doesn't work, was there one part of the year that's better for those boards, or is it that they'd like to have a pool that they can pull from at any point, or is it both?
I probably wasn't clear. The concern and challenge that's been shared with me is our current process is onerous on them when a vacancy inevitably occurs.
Okay.
Which I'm sympathetic to. I don't have the answer. I don't know that we need to solve that tonight because it's not necessarily the question of the day. But I just want to clarify that.
Okay. Yeah, because that's part of the reason why we moved to this, and it's not perfect.
And they've been very clear that they're cognizant that there was a lot of good effort and work to get it right, and they're like, this doesn't actually quite work either, just because there's a fair amount of normal attrition.
I do like the idea of a pool to pull from, which is a whole big can of worms. I didn't know that.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing a majority on either side of this, which is a strange one.
I would I'm comfortable with Councilor Gallegos' recommendation to, in addition to moving PC, moving all of them. I don't see a reason we wouldn't, but I don't feel strongly that we need to. I'm open to that.
Okay.
And that's what I had asked, if we do that we make sure that works for staff. If we move all of them 2 months, in terms of staff's workload, are there things that causes a problem for? Maybe it's 3 months they need it to be, or whatever it might be. But I would like to make a decision that it works for staff. And I would prefer to keep it all together as it currently is. But, you know, I'm not wedded to this really strongly.
Sure, I have a couple of thoughts if you guys don't mind me
Please.
sharing them. So again, because this isn't an election year, there isn't as much urgency, just in my humble opinion, for the PC to be moved this year because we won't have candidates. So if there is an exploration for moving all of it, because this now impacts all of the boards, I might want to suggest doing a little bit more robust, just asking that, hearing some of these, that's the first I've heard of those things, right? We did have 2 counselors meet with the chairs and maybe regrouping with that. And then because time is sort of the essence for this fall recruitment when we open it up in August, I don't know that I'd be able to come back to you in the next couple of weeks to say, let's move all of them at this point. So what I would recommend to pass forward, either start with Planning Commission now as sort of a pilot, and then next cycle, next year, Planning Commission will already be on there for your council election, and then I recommend all the boards if we do feel like it's a value. Or hold on everything right now, get input holistically, and do it if that making sense for next year's recruitment. So, because I don't want to put staff in limbo and our boards in limbo, opening up this recruitment and doing all the messaging, so.
That is helpful.
Yeah, before when it was limited to Planning Commission, totally easy. We're going to look at, which I also agree could be a benefit. We just haven't really weighed the pros and cons.
I think there's a lot to discuss there. I would love the input of the chairs, possibly bring that forward. So my recommendation would be to hold on everything and then try to create something maybe for all of them and put them all on the same timeline. But I'm happy to hear out council. That's also where the majority, at least for now, of council has been, which is just let's give staff time to kind of figure something out along with the boards.
Mayor, just
Councilor
for me,
Blair.
I'm fine with that. I would say since it is on the table and it seems like an easy button to just say, do the PC thing, and then everything else we look into.
I'd be okay with that too.
I still don't have a majority there.
Again, you're not voting.
I gave a thumbs up. I don't know if you saw that.
If we can bring it forward and possibly vote on it at some point. Does staff feel like they have enough on this? Great.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll move forward with the HRBU scope change through an ordinance and proceed with that recruitment in about a month from now.
Great. Thank you so much. To our final agenda item tonight, new ideas. Through the process that we have laid out, I did not hear anything this week. I spoke to staff earlier. I believe staff did not hear anything either.
I can't hear you all sitting in your microphone. There we
Can you hear me?
go. Yeah, now.
Sorry, okay. No new ideas were flagged for me this week, and no new ideas were flagged for staff this week, from my
There's no
understanding.
idea of cooling off, so we're gonna count as that.
So,
Can I expand on that briefly? Just not on the cooling off for the PC. I just want to say I had a great check-in with our city manager the other day, and then texted something to the effect, we've gotten a lot of really robust feedback from the public in the past couple weeks, and the vast majority of it I really have enjoyed reading. But I gotta say, there's something a little bit striking to me about some of how some folks are writing to staff and council, and I have a thick skin. People can call me whatever they want. But I'm really struggling with the degree of vitriol that I've seen in some of the comments directed at staff, and I just do not appreciate it, and I don't understand where it's coming from, and I just it's stuck in my craw, and I don't know if it's because of the heat wave, but I'm just very appreciative of the ongoing work from staff. We'll have disagreements or critiques where they arise, but wow, some of the things coming in are interesting.
May I?
please.
Just to say, I feel that it's very comforting, it's reassuring, it's not easy, but it's an avenue that's easy for people to say things that they might not say in person, but they're real. And it's a platform that we have to understand is an avenue for people to express how they really feel, and they might not have to be able to do it in person. And we, not city staff necessarily, but we're, that's part of what we do is we are the sounding board for people to open up. And I think it's one of those environments where it empowers people to say, to write things that they might not say in person.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great night. Meeting adjourned.
Wait. There was one thing I wanted to bring to the table, which is so Kyle and I have both been contacted by the young woman and the gentleman who spoke to us about plugging abandoned wells. They would like to come to us and give us a better picture of what's going on in Lafayette with wells, how many are close to schools, what is the nature of them. And I have attended one meeting of a working group that's working on this regionally. And I think it would be beneficial to have a little included in that conversation, this regional working group, where they're going, so that I could share that with you guys and get feedback, so that as I try and, represent the city in this working group, I have a sense of what we care about. So we haven't talked about this before, and I know our agenda is full and we've gotten delayed on a lot of things, so I don't really know where this fits. Do you want to add anything about that? There are some community members with expertise and knowledge that I think could be very helpful to us in understanding this. It's like adding another thing to our agenda when we have a lot on our plate. So I am saying that in full knowledge that it's an issue, but it is an issue not just for us, but for Erie and Frederick and Dacono and some parts of unincorporated Boulder. And so I would like some guidance, and I think Kyle would too, of how you want to proceed with regard to this topic.
You want guidance tonight on how to proceed on this topic?
Just general thoughts of whether you think it makes sense to have a working session to talk about this further. Are you not interested at all? Just sort of where are people on this topic?
I think it's a really difficult question to answer. It's quite broad. It's quite a big topic. I know there's a couple working groups going. I know there's a lot of interest. I would love to know the exact specific way in which we could work around to get a presentation going, and understand that the majority of council would have to sign off on that before anything comes before us. But then also, this could definitely be a workshop session toward the future. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's a very full agenda at the moment, so it would be a difficult one. Mayor Pro Tem?
I would think that a workshop agenda item would be prudent, so that we can understand the landscape. And it's not just Boulder County, it's not just the Front Range, it's the whole state of Colorado that has these issues, and there's a long history in it. And putting that fractal of Lafayette in the big picture and what we're dealing with, I think is something that should be done in a workshop, so that we can know what landscape we're working with and what we're up against, and provide the opportunity for maybe not a presentation, but for us to get the information necessary to have the discussion about what all is on the table. And this regional working group is emblematic of the problem, is that it's not as simple as it might appear to be on the surface.
Okay.
Maybe I can work through the topics. We also have special counsel Elizabeth Toranos, that had helped the city in 2019. And so let's connect offline, just because this item hasn't been noticed as far as having a discussion on oil and gas. It's more of let's explore what it could look like to bring it back to the full council.
Yep.
And just the only thing I would add on that is love if we could offer an opportunity for the young folks to present during that workshop. Any opportunity we get to engage Lafayette's young people in local governance is super cool, and they are wicked smart.
Great, thank you. Okay, now, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, sorry about that.